Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Soni Millbrook. Soni Millbrook was born on February 15, 1981, in Memphis, Tennessee, USA. She is the daughter of Christine Millbrook Bennett and grew up in a large family with many siblings, having 2 sisters and 3 brothers. This warm and close-knit environment helped her build a special relationship with her cousin Jenny during her teenage years. Soni became a popular student at her high school. In 1998, when she was 17 years old and in the 11th grade, she met a man named Lakeith Moody, who was older than her. She soon began a relationship with him. However, the relationship was not a happy one, as Lakeith was abusive and violent, leaving visible injuries on Soni's body. Despite this, they had 4 children, 3 girls and a boy named after his father. In 1999, Soni's mother discovered a bruise on Soni's chest. When her mother asked her about it, Soni cried and confessed that Lakeith had caused the injury. A friend of Soni's also witnessed the injury, but Soni refused to report Lakeith's behavior to the police. Lakeith often controlled Soni and tried to isolate her from her friends and family. That same year, Soni moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. One day, the management informed her of an incident at her apartment. When she arrived, she found a chaotic scene: damaged furniture, missing clothes, a destroyed television, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including under the stairs. Strangely, the mirror had the words, "Kiki loves you," with Kiki being Lakeith's nickname. Lakeith's behavior made Soni's relatives even more concerned. On October 31, 2000, Soni and her cousin, Pamela, went to a bar called The Mirage with Lakeith. While at the bar, Lakeith became aggressive towards Soni by slapping her and throwing a drink in her face. After the incident, Soni and Pamela left the bar and got into their car. According to Pamela, Soni was shaken and frightened by Lakeith's actions. Soni asked Pamela to take her home immediately because she was afraid that Lakeith would come after them. When Soni got home, she locked the door securely. An hour later, Lakeith came to the house, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela had to threaten to call the police to make Lakeith leave. Once Soni calmed down, her cousin decided to leave her alone. However, that evening, Pamela received a call informing her that Soni had been hospitalized. Lakeith had forced his way into the house, and when Soni tried to end the relationship, he attacked her. He tore off Soni's clothes and hit her on the head, face, chest, arms, and between her thighs. She suffered bruises all over her body, loose teeth, and even lost consciousness because Lakeith choked her until she passed out. Lakeith later accidentally discovered that Soni was on birth control pills, and he attacked her again. The next morning, Soni called Pamela and asked her cousin to take her to the hospital because of serious health problems. In late 2008, Soni, then 27, worked at a Christian institute. She was considered a reliable and punctual employee. Therefore, when she took time off or missed work, it was usually due to important reasons. Once, she called her supervisor to report that she could not come to work because her face was badly bruised, and she did not want the children to see it. After she asked for a day off, Director Leslie approved it. However, when Soni returned a few days later, the bruises were so obvious that the director allowed her to wear sunglasses while working at the academy. Lakeith's violence not only affected Soni and their children but also caused concern in the community. In April 2008, Lakeith was found sitting in an SUV with a gun in his hand, despite being previously prohibited from owning a gun due to a criminal record. Furthermore, he had previously served 2 years in prison for burglary and 3 years in prison for drug possession with intent to distribute. Soni tried to avoid her boyfriend, but it was almost impossible. The situation came to a head on October 6, 2008. At that time, Sony did not arrive at the academy by 5 p.m. Her sister received a text message from Sony saying that Lakeith was holding her hostage in his home and had been beating her all day. Sony also provided her home address. Sony's sister called the police. 2 officers went to Sony's house. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer since it was locked from the inside. They then called the security department to unlock the door. When the police entered the house, they saw Sony's boyfriend jumping out of the back window of the apartment. Sony stood in the hallway, crying and unable to speak because of her grief. Her 4 children were also present, making for a very heartbreaking scene. Sony's face and neck were covered in bruises and scratches. When she calmed down, Sony explained what had happened. Sony and Lakeith began arguing, and he refused to let her leave the house. She told the police that Lakeith would not let her or the children near the window. She also said that Lakeith injured one of their children by grabbing the child and preventing her from taking the child to the hospital. Sony said that her boyfriend had been both physically and verbally abusive. During one altercation, he tied a baby blanket around her neck and choked her until she lost consciousness. When the police arrived, Lakeith threatened to choke her again and said he would kill her if the police did not let him go. The police searched the area but did not find Lakeith. Sony then left the house with the children in her car. 3 days later, she filed a restraining order against Lakeith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any contact with him. However, she missed the hearing, and the protective order was never granted. Nearly 6 months later, on March 10, 2009, Sony was still in contact with Lakeith. That day, he was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead, he began arguing with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly turned violent as he slapped her and pulled her hair. She tried to break free and ran out of the apartment while Lakeith screamed and threatened to kill her. Lakeith did not catch Sony but instead kidnapped their youngest child, an infant, and drove away at high speed. A police patrol alerted to the domestic disturbance arrived as Lakeith was running away. The officers attempted to stop him, but he escaped. In early 2010, Sony, 28, was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. She had to stay home to care for her 5th child, who was 9 weeks old, because of poor health. In January, Sony and the children moved into the Budget Lodge in Memphis. However, on the first day Sony moved in, she and Lakeith's arguments became so loud that motel staff had to intervene because they were disturbing other guests. Sony and Lakeith could not maintain a peaceful relationship. They argued constantly, disturbing neighbors and management with the noise. On January 22, a hotel security guard witnessed Lakeith in a very agitated state. He arrived at a high rate of speed in Sony's car and then began yelling at her as she stood on the second-floor balcony with the children. In his anger, he threw a bag of groceries at her. The security guard arrived and told Lakeith not to make any noise or throw things in the hotel. Lakeith was instructed to settle the argument in his room. However, Lakeith told the security guard that he did not need to worry about it. Lakeith then locked his car and accompanied the security guard to an unoccupied room on the 3rd floor. The security guard asked Lakeith to hand over any hotel keys he had. Surprisingly, Lakeith had keys to 3 different rooms, even though he was not registered as a guest. The next day, Lakeith and Sony moved into room 222 with their children. However, the night manager asked Lakeith to leave that evening. Although Lakeith left as requested, he soon returned. The arguments between Sony and Lakeith continued for several more days until the guard asked Lakeith to leave the hotel for good. As Lakeith left, the front desk clerk tried to calm him down. The guard also warned Lakeith not to come back that night. Lakeith got into her car and drove away. Some time later, Sony spoke to Pamela and confided that she was having problems in her life. She was staying at the motel and wanted to talk to Pamela about something important. Sony said that she would call if she left the motel or if her boyfriend left first. The next day started normally. At 7 a.m., Sony took the younger children to daycare and the older children to school. Around 11 a.m., the housekeeping manager knocked on Sony's door and spoke to her through the window to inform her that they needed to pay the rent or they would have to leave. The manager returned several times that day. On a visit around 2:30 p.m., Lakeith answered the door. The room was dark. Lakeith told the manager that his mother was on her way to pick up the money. On January 27th, Sony did not pick up her older daughter on time. So the school secretary called the child's grandmother, Christine, to ask her to come pick up the girl. When Christine tried to contact Sony, she received no response. At around 6 p.m., she discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Concerned that she could not reach Sony, Christine asked her husband to pick up the younger children from daycare while she went to the school to find out what was wrong. They contacted the police and reported the incident at approximately 10:30 p.m. Later, on January 28th, the housekeeping manager re-entered room 222 and began taking inventory of the items that Sony and Lakeith had left behind. The room was filled with clothing in a large trash bag, which was then taken to a storage area. After the room was cleaned, it was ready for new guests. On January 29th, James and Rhonda Sargent moved into the room. They quickly noticed a foul odor and attempted to block it with incense, but were unable to eliminate it completely. They also discovered that previous tenants had attempted the same, as they found scented tissues in the tiles and ceiling vents. Because the smell was so strong that they reported it. On January 29th, officers from the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to inquire about Sony's whereabouts, as that was where she was last seen. However, they did not enter room 222. Lakeith was arrested on February 2nd, around 7 p.m., while inside Sony's car at a shopping center. He was held for 48 hours on a charge of car theft. During questioning about Sony's disappearance, Lakeith said he last saw her on January 26th. He explained they had met in the hotel parking lot that morning after Sony had dropped off her children at school. They went into the room, had sex, and then returned outside. Lakeith then took Sony's car keys and left the hotel. He claimed Sony planned to use her welfare and student loan money to buy a new car, so he wasn't worried about keeping her car. Lakeith also said he had been living in the car since January 26th. However, investigators discovered that Lakeith had actually been staying at a different hotel. Additionally, given the snowy weather during that time, it was unlikely that he had spent the night in the car. On February 3rd, police found a debit card with Sony's name on it and several recent purchase receipts inside the car. That same day, police also searched the clothes stored at the hotel for DNA or other evidence, but found nothing. Due to the lack of evidence linking Lakeith to Sony's disappearance, he was released. Sony's cousin and her mother had to undertake the painful task of going to the hotel where Sony was staying to collect her belongings. At that time, Sony's cousin had a bad feeling but did not find any evidence. On February 4th, the police went to Sony's cousin's house and found a DVD player in Sony's wallet. Sony's cousin said they had received the items from Moody. According to the cousin, Lakeith borrowed the DVD player on January 24th under the pretext of watching a movie and drove a red car that day. When he saw Lakeith again a few days later, the cousin asked why Lakeith did not pick up the children on January 27th. But Lakeith evaded the question. When the cousin asked about Sony's whereabouts, Lakeith left the DVD player and wallet behind and left. Around that time, guests James and Rhonda Sargent requested to be moved out of room 222 because of the persistent odor. Since there were no other rooms available, they moved to another hotel. Later guests in room 222 also complained of a foul odor, despite the room being cleaned several times and the carpets being cleaned in early February. The odor persisted, only easing slightly over several days. On February 4th, homicide detectives arrived at the hotel to investigate. By this time, room 222 had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. As a result, the detectives were unable to enter the room to collect evidence. Instead, they asked hotel staff if they had noticed anything unusual. All staff responded that nothing was unusual. Then, on February 7th, James and Rhonda returned to the hotel and changed rooms 3 times. During one of the changes, they spent the night in room 222. While there, they informed management that the room still smelled unpleasant. To address this issue, in March, the hotel performed a more thorough cleaning of room 222. The staff cleaned the carpet, bedding, shower curtains, and window blinds. However, the results were shocking. The odor not only remained but became even more intense. The manager discussed the issue with the security guard. During the conversation, they recalled that the previous tenant, Sony, had disappeared at the end of January. The security guard recalled the events that occurred at that time and suggested that the manager check room 222 for traces of blood or cleaning agents. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to accompany him. What they found was horrifying. The 2 men entered the room where the manager had removed the mattress from one of the beds, leaving only the bed frame. The bottom of the bed frame had a cover. When they lifted the box spring, they discovered a large gap where anything could be hidden from view. Looking through the sturdy edges of the bed frame, they saw the unthinkable, a decomposing body. They called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. The bed frame was found to have many marks on it, and there were 2 pieces of broken wood near the headboard. A towel and a cloth bag were found between the legs of the body. The victim was wearing a shirt but nothing below the waist. The forensic team's autopsy determined that the cause of death was strangulation with a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the neck, under one arm, around the chest, and ended behind the back. The medical examiner concluded that it would take at least 2 to 3 minutes of sustained pressure to cause death. In order to find the killer, the police collected items from between the victim's legs for analysis. The victim's shirt had an unidentified fingerprint. In addition, the scarf and the cloth bag did not belong to the victim. DNA samples that matched Sony's genetic profile, as well as that of a woman, were discovered. More remarkably, male DNA was also found on the cable, which led to the hypothesis that Sony had died at the time she was reported missing. The coaxial cable used in the case may have come from a DVD player that Lakeith borrowed from her cousin. Lakeith had been arrested by police for illegal possession of a weapon, and he was also the last person seen with Sony alive, making him a suspect in the case. He was in Sony's car when he was arrested and taken to the Mason detention facility. On March 18th, authorities launched an investigation into why the case unfolded in such a strange way. The chief of police said the victim's family deserved an explanation and acknowledged that the circumstances of the case were unprecedented, making it a shocking case of domestic violence. He also regretted that the room where Sony died had been cleaned and rented out multiple times, making it difficult for police to collect evidence. However, this explanation was met with skepticism. One of the first tenants, Rhonda, said the police should have been allowed into the room when James and Rhonda visited in January and would have found Sony sooner if they had noticed the smell of a decomposing body. Rhonda believes the police were slow in finding Sony. Following the loss, Sony's family held a funeral for her on March 24th. Sony's children were placed in the care of her sister on April 1st. They are currently trying to gain legal custody of the children. Sony's sister said that although the children were the primary victims, everyone in the family's lives was turned upside down by the loss. She pledged to take care of Sony's children, making sure they had enough food, clothes, and toys, and to keep them together as a family. She also said Sony had benefited from a social program, and she would continue to care for the children as her sister had. The card had been loaded with money before Sony went missing because she received an income tax refund. Police tracked the card's activity and found that it was in Lakeith's possession. During the surveillance, they noticed that the card was used on February 1st at a convenience store Sony usually visited to withdraw cash using her electronic welfare transfer card. Notably, this occurred 4 days after Sony went missing. Officers went to the store and requested the owner to show them the footage from their 16 security cameras. Through the footage, they observed that on the morning of February 1st, at 11:38 a.m., a man dressed in yellow conducted a transaction at the store. He used a Sony card to buy a bottle of orange juice, withdrew cash, and purchased a cigar. After making these purchases, he returned to a car driven by someone else. With all the evidence against him, Lakeith's trial began in the first week of February 2014, more than 4 years after the crime. By then, the Budget Lodge Hotel involved in the crime had closed. Lakeith did not admit his guilt. During the trial, the prosecutor portrayed the case as the tragic end of a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, Lakeith's defense attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to establish his client's guilt. He pointed out that there were no witnesses or physical evidence to prove Lakeith's crime. The attorney also noted that the police found fingerprints on the victim's bed frame, but those fingerprints did not match Lakeith's. This suggests that someone else may have been involved in the crime. Additionally, the attorney argued that there was reason to suspect that the victim had had relationships with several other men over the years. He also emphasized that his client had never been convicted of domestic violence against the victim. Furthermore, he revealed something that the public did not know. Sony moved in with Lakeith again because she had to leave a relative's home due to a rat infestation. On February 6th, video footage showing Lakeith using a Sony prepaid card 4 days after her death was presented to the court. The defense claimed his calm demeanor throughout the transaction demonstrated his innocence, while the prosecution saw it as evidence of a cold and ruthless man with no regard for the crimes he was accused of committing. On February 7, 2014, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. On February 10, he appealed the conviction, arguing that the court had erred in considering his past acts of domestic violence and that the evidence was insufficient. On July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the convictions, affirming the decision. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Timothy Jones Jr. As a child, Timothy witnessed hardships in his family. His mother suffered from schizophrenia, and her mental health gradually declined. Eventually, she had to leave home to receive constant care. When Timothy was 20, his father moved with him to his grandmother's house. There, Timothy faced domestic violence, substance abuse, and alcohol abuse. Despite his difficult upbringing, Timothy showed an aptitude for mathematics and computer engineering. He could solve problems easily and take apart and reassemble computers to make them run faster. However, things changed when Timothy reached his teens. At age 10, he began hearing voices in his head. By middle school, he was using drugs and drinking excessively. At age 15, he suffered a traumatic brain injury in a car accident that affected the frontal lobe of his brain, the area that controls impulses and is associated with mental illness. After the accident, Timothy exhibited unusual behavior and was very irritable. He felt jealous of his father and believed that anyone who had a relationship with him was causing his father to neglect him. Over time, Timothy believed that his father did not love him and feared being abandoned. Although his intelligence developed, his emotional development was affected, causing him to have a childlike mentality and lack of empathy. After graduating from high school, Timothy Jones Jr. dreamed of joining the United States Navy. His intelligence helped him to study there, but he lacked athletic ability and discipline. He lasted only a few weeks of training and often cried out of frustration. He had difficulty keeping up with the rigorous requirements, which led to depression and a drug test that revealed substance abuse, resulting in his expulsion. In 2000, Timothy began associating with people involved in bad activities. Police found him in possession of illegal narcotics and writing checks in his father's name. The police forced Timothy's father to control his son or face arrest himself. In 2001, Timothy Jones Jr. was sent to a work camp in an Illinois state prison for a year. When he was released, he seemed to have changed, with religion becoming the main driving force in his life. Timothy met Amber while they were both working at an amusement park in Chicago. After a while, in 2004, he invited her to his church. Within weeks, they decided to marry, in keeping with the church's expectation of immediate marriage. Amber was 19 and Timothy was 22. However, Amber soon learned about the strictness of the church. Women were not allowed to cut their hair, wear pants, wear makeup, or wear jewelry. Additionally, Timothy believed that women should submit to their husbands and bear children. Timothy was very religious and devoted to the church. Although many advised him not to take the Bible literally, he persisted. They soon had 3 children, Mara, Elias, and Natan, each born a year apart. As their family grew, they moved to Mississippi. There, Timothy graduated with highest honors from State University, earning a degree in computer science and engineering. Timothy Jones Jr. was building a family while working multiple jobs, and his family was extremely proud of him. With a promising future, Tim was truly a talented man, and everything seemed to be going well for him. He had secured a job at Intel as a computer chip manufacturer, which his wife, Amber, saw as an opportunity for a better life. After living in student housing in Mississippi, they dreamed of a larger home to raise their 3 children and even considered hiring a nanny. However, things did not go as planned. Timothy bought an old mobile home on a dirt road in Red Bank because he dreamed of living on a farm. He purchased animals to raise, and Amber stayed home to care for them. By 2012, they had 2 more children, and problems began to arise. Timothy wanted Amber to homeschool the children, even though she only had a high school education. Amber felt lonely and isolated, with no family nearby and Timothy's family far away. She felt inferior to her intelligent and educated husband. The tension in Timothy and Amber's marriage increased when Timothy accused Amber of having an affair with a neighbor. Their marriage began to fall apart, and they started to consider divorce. Timothy did not want Amber involved in the children's lives, so he sought the help of a therapist and asked his divorce attorney to declare that he was capable of raising the children alone. Amber, without a lawyer and unsure of what to do, decided that it was best for the children to stay with their father. She felt she had nothing to provide for the children, as she had no job or education. Ultimately, the court decided that Timothy would have primary custody as the sole financial provider, and Amber would be granted regular visitation rights. After leaving her husband and children, Amber faced many difficulties. Meanwhile, Timothy began to lose control and suffer from his failed marriage. He started using drugs and alcohol again and struggled with the voices in his head. He became easily angered over small things. Amber recounted that Timothy once beat her in front of the children until she passed out. Unable to manage work and family, Timothy hired a nanny service to care for the children. The first 2 nannies found Timothy's house very clean and noted that he was dedicated and attentive to the children, but their attitudes changed when they learned about Timothy's condition. On the 3rd occasion, Timothy hired Crystal, a 17-year-old nanny who had a young daughter. Timothy gradually developed feelings for Crystal, and she soon became his lover. Timothy began to pressure Crystal to follow his religious customs, including wearing long dresses, growing her hair long, and being submissive to him. However, when Crystal refused, their relationship deteriorated. Crystal later spoke of how Timothy was too harsh with his children. He forced them to stand on their toes for hours, believing it was good for their weak bodies. Crystal eventually left after witnessing Timothy trying to hit her young daughter. After Crystal left, Timothy hired another nanny. The new nanny noticed a major change in Timothy's home. Once clean, the house was now littered with trash and dirty clothes, and there were even cockroaches. Over time, Timothy became increasingly violent and punished his children daily. He imposed a restricted diet, feeding them only oatmeal throughout the day and limiting them to one meal. In August 2014, the nanny contacted South Carolina Social Services to report conditions at Timothy's home. She described the lack of food and physical abuse the children were subjected to. In fact, the violence was so severe that teachers had reported it to the agency months earlier. The agency had previously required Timothy to sign a non-abuse pledge, but the children came to school with bruises and provided evidence linking them to the violence. On the afternoon of August 28, 2014, Timothy picked up the children. At the time, he was very angry about an electrical problem in the house. Timothy took his anger out on his 6-year-old son, Nathan, and repeatedly made Nathan bend down to pick up sand as punishment. Every time Nathan slowed down, Timothy hit him with a belt. While Nathan was being punished, Amber, Timothy's ex-wife, called to talk to the children. She made several calls until Timothy answered at 7:10. During the conversation, Nathan told his mother about the punishment for breaking the outlet, claiming it was an accident. Timothy angrily hung up, telling Amber to stop defending him. After hours of torture, Nathan was exhausted, dehydrated, and begged for it to stop. He passed out, ending it all. Timothy took Nathan to bed and left him without giving him water or help. Call records show that Amber called 8 more times after that. Around 1 a.m., Timothy took his 8-year-old daughter, Mara, to a convenience store to buy 10 packs of cigarettes. When he got home, he strangled Mara. Timothy then went to his 7-year-old son, Elias, and did the same thing. He then unbuckled his belt and strangled Gabriel, 2, and Elaine, 1, until they stopped breathing. When the children did not move, he took a blanket, wrapped each one in it, and placed them in the back seat of the car and drove away. The disappearance of Timothy and his children was reported to the police. The police searched everywhere for Timothy. Fortunately, a police officer stopped his car. As the police approached the car, they immediately detected a foul odor inside. They also noticed that the carpet appeared to have been recently cleaned with bleach. The sheriff asked the driver, Timothy, for identification and license plate number and observed that Timothy appeared to be under the influence of drugs. After checking Timothy's information, the police discovered that he was wanted in South Carolina for a child welfare issue. When asked about the whereabouts of his children, Timothy initially said he had no children, but later mentioned that he had 3 children living in South Carolina. The officers asked for Timothy's relatives' phone numbers to verify the children's safety. After making the call, they immediately arrested Timothy. As Timothy was placed in a patrol car, he became emotional and began telling officers what he had done to his children. He confessed to killing his 3 children for ulterior motives. Timothy explained that he felt very sad and angry when he saw one of his sons playing with an electrical outlet, so he strangled his son until he lost consciousness. Timothy did the same to his other son and his older daughter. He strangled his daughter until she turned blue. In another account, Timothy claimed that his son was trying to hurt him when he saw him playing with an electrical outlet, which prompted him to kill him. In one recording, investigators heard a discussion about Timothy Jones Jr. subjecting his 6-year-old son, Nathan, to hours of punishment. This was because Nathan had accidentally turned off an electrical outlet in the living room. Timothy said he put Nathan to bed afterwards, but when he checked on him, he found him dead. When asked why he did this, Timothy said he heard voices in his head and believed his children were plotting against him. He also thought his children would be happier if they went to heaven. So he decided to kill all of them. After killing his children, Timothy traveled throughout the southeast with the bodies of his 5 children covered in blankets in his car. He eventually dumped them in a remote wooded area in Alabama. In a second statement, Timothy said Nathan's punishment had gotten out of hand. When he went to Nathan's room, he found him dead. Not knowing what to do, Timothy decided to end the lives of all his children. After an autopsy, pathologists were unable to determine a definitive cause of death. However, they theorized that Nathan may have been too weak from the excessive punishment Timothy had imposed on him, making it easier to kill Nathan. Investigators questioned Timothy's actions, particularly why he did not call 911 immediately after the incident. Instead, he attempted to conceal and dispose of his children. Timothy later led investigators to where he had dumped the children's bodies that same day. The remains of the 5 children were found on September 10th. On September 11th, evidence from Timothy's car was collected and turned over to South Carolina authorities. Some of the evidence included family photos, children's clothing, children's drawings, letters from his mother to the children, Timothy's college diploma, and his passport. Notably, Timothy Jones Jr.'s handwritten notes included a list of actions related to the disposal of the bodies, such as moving the bodies, grinding the bones into powder or small pieces, burning the bodies, and preparing necessary items such as camping equipment, gas, and muriatic acid. On September 13, 2014, Jones was admitted to a correctional institution and placed in a special cell separate from the general population. Since then, he has been evaluated by mental health experts, including psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, and forensic specialists. Opinions among these professionals varied. Some diagnosed him with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, or a personality disorder. They suggested his mental state during the crime might have been worsened by drug use and a traumatic brain injury he sustained at age 15, which could have contributed to underlying psychosis. These theories were presented to the jury during his trial. Conversely, other specialists argued that Timothy was mentally competent and that his attempts to hide evidence, including his children, showed he knew his actions were morally and legally wrong. His internet search history indicated he understood what he was doing and how to do it. The prosecution argued that Timothy succumbed to the pressures of a failing marriage and the challenges of raising 5 young children. According to his statements, the catalyst for his actions was his wife's alleged infidelity with their neighbor, who is now her husband. She testified that she did not commit adultery and that her relationship with the neighbor began only after her divorce. The trial occurred in late May 2019, featuring weeks of intense testimonies and evidence against Timothy. The crime is considered one of the most horrific murders in South Carolina's history. Mara's last words to her father were, "Daddy, I love you." When police searched the house, they found Nathan's favorite Toy Story toy broken into pieces. Nathan appeared to have been the most severely punished. Nevertheless, all testimonies agreed on one thing: the children loved their father. On June 13, 2019, after 2 hours of deliberation, Timothy Jones Jr. was sentenced to death. He is currently in solitary confinement at a correctional institution, wearing a green jumpsuit that identifies him as a death row inmate. This tragic case ended the lives of innocent children because of marital issues, with both the father and mother making irreversible mistakes. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kirsten Hatfield. Kirsten Hatfield was born on February 12, 1989, in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Kirsten's father left the family soon after her birth, and her mother, Shannon, moved back in with grandparents. When Kirsten was 2 years old, they moved to their own home. Later, Shannon remarried, but the marriage was short-lived, leaving Shannon to care for her 2 young daughters alone. Kirsten, being the older sibling, took on a lot of responsibility, helping her mother care for her younger sister, Faith. Kirsten and Faith shared a bedroom, while their mother slept in the adjacent room. On May 13, 1997, Shannon put her daughters to bed as usual. Kirsten was 8 years old, and Faith was 3. However, Faith had already fallen asleep, so Shannon only said goodnight to Kirsten and left the door to their room slightly open, as she always did, in case Kirsten or Faith needed her. At around 3 a.m., Shannon was awoken by a noise coming from the girls' room. Thinking one of her daughters was awake, Shannon got out of bed to check on them. As she approached the door, the noise stopped. Assuming her daughters had gone back to sleep, Shannon was about to return to her room when she noticed that the door to their room was now completely closed. This was unusual, as she was certain she had left it slightly open. She wondered if one of them had closed the door or if she had simply forgotten to leave it open. Shannon opened the doors slightly to check, but she didn't enter the room before returning to bed. Shannon went to wake up her daughters at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, but only found Faith in their bedroom. Shannon asked Faith where Kirsten was, and when Faith said she didn't know, Shannon began a thorough search of the house. However, Kirsten was nowhere to be found. Shannon then checked outside the house and contacted the parents of Kirsten's friends to see if she had come to their house. But no one had seen her. Shannon's search efforts led her to call her father, who lived nearby, to see if Kirsten had gone to his house or not. Unfortunately, he hadn't seen her either. At this point, Shannon realized Kirsten was missing, and her father advised her to call the police. When the police arrived, they initially thought Kirsten might be hiding in the house or had simply wandered off for a walk, given the town's low crime rate. However, upon inspecting Kirsten's room, they found the window slightly open with a few drops of blood on the frame. This raised their suspicions that something more serious had occurred. Further investigation led them to discover a piece of children's underwear stained with blood on the ground outside the window. After confirming with Shannon that the underwear belonged to Kirsten, the police realized they were likely dealing with a kidnapping. More officers were called to the scene to assist with the investigation, which marked the beginning of a more extensive search for Kirsten. The police investigation into Kirsten's disappearance began with a search of the area around the house. During this search, the police spoke with Kirsten's mother, who reported hearing a noise at 3 a.m. and now realized that it may have been the sound of her daughter being taken. Despite the search, nothing suspicious was found, and the police began canvassing the neighborhood, speaking with all the residents. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors reported seeing or hearing anything unusual on the night of the abduction. However, one neighbor did mention being woken up by a barking dog around 3 a.m., which coincided with the time of the abduction. With no solid leads, investigators turned to a child psychologist to interview Faith, who was only 3 years old. Despite her young age, Faith was able to share what she had witnessed, but her statement was limited to a single phrase: "A bad person came and took my sister." This confirmed that Kirsten had not left the house voluntarily, but unfortunately, it did not provide any further information about the perpetrator or Kirsten's whereabouts. Detectives had to restart the investigation practically from scratch. Their initial suspicion leaned towards someone who knew Kirsten well, as it seemed unlikely that a stranger could abduct her from her own room without a sound. Working on this theory, police discovered that Kirsten's mother, Shannon, had a history of drug-related problems. The detectives considered the possibility that the abduction might be related to this. Perhaps the mother owed money to some people in the criminal underworld, and they decided to take her daughter as payment. The police did not rule out the mother willingly handing over her daughter. This would explain why the abduction happened almost silently. The investigation into Kirsten's disappearance continued, with detectives initially speaking to Shannon, her mother. Shannon denied any involvement, claiming to have been clean from substance abuse for some time and insisting she would never harm her daughter. Although detectives were not convinced of Shannon's innocence, they could not find any evidence to prove her involvement. The police then turned to the public for help, using the media to ask for any information that might be relevant to the case. In response, they received hundreds of calls, but most of the calls were fruitless. However, one clue provided a promising lead. A woman reported her boyfriend's suspicious behavior, including aggressive outbursts and a disturbing threat he made during an argument. The police investigated the man and discovered that he knew Shannon's brother, which meant Kirsten might have known him too. Additionally, the man had a history of drug use and assault, and he had previously been familiar with the Hatfield family home. Despite this, the investigation ultimately found that the man had a solid alibi for the time Kirsten went missing. Multiple witnesses confirmed that he was at a bar until around 4 a.m. on the night of the disappearance, making it impossible for him to have abducted Kirsten. Detectives pursued multiple leads, but each one led to a dead end. As time passed, the hope of finding Kirsten alive began to fade. Kirsten's mother, Shannon, refused to give up. She took matters into her own hands, determined to find her daughter. She gave interviews to local media outlets, distributed flyers, and even investigated potential suspects on her own. However, Shannon faced numerous obstacles. Many local businesses refused to display Kirsten's flyers, citing company policies. She also attempted to meet with the state governor, but was unsuccessful. Shannon established a volunteer center to help find Kirsten. The center focused on distributing flyers and engaging with the media. However, Shannon encountered new challenges. Some volunteers stole money, lied about their work, and used the media to gain attention for themselves. Despite these setbacks, Shannon persevered in her search for the truth. After years of effort, Shannon realized that her approach was not yielding results. She enrolled in college, earned a degree in criminology, and became a parole officer. Shannon's goal was not only to find her daughter's kidnapper but also to protect others from potentially dangerous criminals who might be released from prison. Shannon suspected Kirsten's kidnapper had a history of violent crimes. To pursue this lead, she researched people with violent pasts in her area but found no connection to Kirsten's disappearance. Despite her efforts, she eventually had to accept that Kirsten might have passed away and might not return. Still, Shannon continued to search for answers. Periodically, police reopened the case to investigate new leads, working with the FBI to create an updated sketch of Kirsten's possible appearance. In 2014, there was a breakthrough in the Kirsten case. A woman contacted the police and shared a shocking discovery she had made while sorting through her late mother's belongings. Among her mother's possessions was a diary detailing the woman's father's confession, claiming he had killed Kirsten Hatfield. The diary was extremely detailed, and detectives were convinced of its accuracy. According to the diary, the man had kidnapped Kirsten from her bedroom, took her to a house he owned in a nearby town, and murdered her after horribly torturing her. The description of the crime process spanned many pages, leaving even veteran investigators confused. The diary also revealed that the crime had been recorded on a videotape. Investigators immediately questioned the woman's father. However, his reaction was surprising. While he denied any involvement in the Kirsten case, he asserted that he had known who was responsible for Kirsten's death, saying the murder had occurred at his ex-girlfriend's house. The police were confused and asked for the house address. They quickly received a warrant and sent a team to thoroughly search this house. The forensic investigation began with a crucial step: the use of luminol, a substance that glows when exposed to very small amounts of blood. When the forensic team applied luminol to the scene, they were surprised by the results. An expert later described the house as lit up like a Christmas tree due to the numerous bloodstains. The bloodstains matched the details of the murder described in the diary, leading the team to believe they had finally found concrete evidence. To investigate further, police removed the floorboards, cut out sections of wallpaper and sent these items to a laboratory for analysis. They also organized an excavation team in the hope of finding the victim's body. In addition, the police also discovered a box containing hundreds of videotapes in the house, so they had to review the diary. They suspected that one of the tapes might have contained footage of the victim being abused. Detectives meticulously reviewed each tape, but after hours of analysis, none of the tapes were related to the murder. Excavations also proved fruitless, with no remains or evidence found in the soil. However, just when the investigation seemed to have been gaining momentum, the police encountered an unexpected and shocking episode. Experts who analyzed the bloodstains in the house concluded that the bloodstains had actually belonged to an animal, not a human. This revelation left the police stunned and wondering what had just happened. Had someone deliberately deceived them with a cruel joke? Or was the person writing the diary struggling with mental health issues and convinced by a false narrative that had developed in their mind? The truth was still unknown. Detectives had run out of leads in Kirsten's case, and the case was once again stalled. In an effort to revive the investigation, the case was reassigned to a new detective named Daryl Miller in the summer of 2015. Miller decided to start from scratch and review all existing documents and records. During his scrutiny, Miller discovered something surprising. His predecessors had overlooked some key evidence, including blood found on Kirsten's windowsill and on her underwear. The evidence had been stored in a warehouse, but shockingly had never been sent to a laboratory for analysis. Miller suspected that the reason for this might have been because police initially thought the blood belonged to Kirsten, which would not have yielded any useful results. However, Miller decided to send them to the laboratory for analysis. The results were surprising. The blood sample did not belong to Kirsten, but to an unidentified man. This was a significant breakthrough after many years of investigation. Miller decided to collect DNA samples from all the men who had participated in the investigation since the kidnapping. Police tracked down each person on the list and sent their DNA to a lab for analysis. Everyone was cooperative and provided their DNA samples quickly. Miller patiently waited for the results, and finally he received a call from the lab. Experts had analyzed one of the samples and found a perfect match with bloodstains found on the window and the victim's underwear. The DNA belonged to Anthony Palma, 56. The Hatfield family's neighbor who lived across the street. Anthony had been one of the first people the police spoke to on the day of the abduction. At the time, he claimed to have woken up around 3 a.m. due to his dog barking. Now that his DNA had been linked to the crime scene, detectives decided to bring him in for further questioning. Although the DNA evidence was sufficient for a conviction, the investigators hoped to obtain a confession from Anthony. A confession would expedite the trial and potentially lead them to Kirsten's body, which was still missing. To get Anthony to talk, the detectives invited him for questioning, telling him it was a routine process. They claimed they were re-interviewing everyone, including neighbors, to gather new information. In reality, their goal was to get Anthony to admit whether he had ever been inside the Hatfield family home. Detectives asked Anthony to recall any additional details about the night in question. He retold the same story he had shared 18 years earlier. But this time he added a new detail. He claimed to have seen a white car parked outside Kirsten's house, although he didn't think much of it at the time. The police then asked Anthony about his relationship with Kirsten and her family. He stated that he knew them as neighbors, but he had never interacted with Kirsten personally. He maintained that he got along well with the other neighborhood children, who would often ask him for help fixing their bikes or visit him for candy. This conversation became a critical point in the investigation, as the police had discovered Anthony's blood on the windowsill of Kirsten's bedroom. When they asked if he had ever entered the house, Anthony claimed he had not. This statement raised suspicions, as the presence of his blood suggested otherwise. The detectives faced a challenge. Anthony's blood was fresh, suggesting it had been left recently, but he had had a visitor to the house when it belonged to a friend. The investigators decided to move forward with the interrogation. Informing Anthony that his blood had been found in Kirsten's room and on her underwear. Anthony repeatedly denied ever entering the house, despite the evidence to the contrary. The investigators attempted to extract a confession, but he consistently maintained his innocence. The detectives changed their approach and exited the room, leaving Detective Miller to speak with Anthony privately. Miller entered with a photo of Kirsten, placing it in front of Anthony. However, Anthony promptly pushed the photo away, refusing to look at it for the remainder of the conversation. Miller asked various questions, attempting to prompt Anthony into a confession, but he continued to deny any involvement. Failing to obtain an admission of guilt, the police ended the interrogation and apprehended Anthony. A subsequent search of his residence, made possible by a search warrant, uncovered no evidence of Kirsten's remains or any other relevant evidence. During the trial, Anthony repeatedly denied any involvement in the crime. But DNA evidence told a different story. As the trial progressed, new details emerged that the police had initially overlooked. It was revealed that Anthony had a history of run-ins with the law, including a prior conviction for breaking into a girl's bedroom and assaulting her. He had also been imprisoned in the 1980s for a violent attack involving a weapon. Anthony's past convictions signaled his dangerousness, yet were overlooked in 1997. In 2017, a jury returned a guilty verdict for Kirsten's kidnapping and Kirsten's murder, and Anthony was sentenced to life in prison. Despite the guilty verdict, Anthony never disclosed the location of Kirsten's body. Kirsten's mother refused to give up hope, however. She consistently reached out to Anthony, calling and visiting him in prison, in an effort to find out where Kirsten's body was. She spent hours trying to extract the truth from him, but ultimately, she was unsuccessful. Tragically, in 2019, Anthony was killed by his cellmate, who was motivated by a desire for revenge for Anthony's horrific crime against a child. As a result, Kirsten's family's only hope of finding Kirsten's body now depends on hikers or tourists who might stumble upon it in remote national parks, where Anthony may have buried her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Gabriela Alcaino. Gabriela Alcaino was born on May 17, 2001, in Santiago, the capital city of Chile. She was the only child of Federico Alino and Carolina Donosa Campos, and the first grandchild in a large, close-knit family. Her paternal uncle, Rodrigo, who served as her godfather, and her grandfather, Carlos, both adored her deeply, with Carlos regarding her as the central figure in his life. Gabriela grew up in a loving and supportive environment, despite her family's modest means. Her parents, though not wealthy, worked hard to provide her with a good education and upbringing. When Gabriela was 5, her parents divorced, and she lived with her mother, who dedicated herself to raising her. Her father, however, remarried and had 2 younger sons, but he continued to support Gabriela and her mother financially and remained involved in her life. Gabriela was a sweet and friendly child, who was a bit shy but made friends easily. Her gentle nature and lovely appearance earned her admiration from those around her. She excelled academically, enjoyed music, dance, and art, and her parents encouraged her talents. Gabriella cherished her relationships with her younger half-brothers, spending quality time with them at her father's nearby home during weekends and holidays. Overall, Gabriella's childhood was a happy and carefree time, filled with love and support from her family. Gabriella's first love was at the age of 15. She fell for Fabian Chasis Aravan, a fellow student who was a year older. At first, their relationship was innocent and sweet. They would walk together, share ice cream, and steal kisses. Fabian came from a good family with well-respected parents who valued education and raised him to be a good person. However, Fabian was a quiet and private person who struggled with social interactions. He would avoid eye contact and turn away from others, leading many to think he was just shy. Gabriella's father met Fabian and thought he was a calm, dependable, and responsible young man. He had a serious talk with Fabian, asking him to take care of Gabriella, and Fabian promised to do so. Initially, Fabian made an effort to be attentive and caring. However, as time passed, a different side of Fabian emerged. He became controlling and cruel, revealing a darker aspect of his personality. Fabian's controlling behavior dominated the relationship. He was intensely jealous and dictated who Gabriella could and couldn't interact with. He monitored her phone activity, insisting on instant responses to his calls and messages, regardless of the time. If she failed to comply, he would throw tantrums, displaying childish and abusive behavior. During the first 6 months of their relationship, Gabriella attempted to downplay Fabian's frequent outbursts of anger and jealousy, believing they would eventually subside. Blinded by her love for him, she tried to meet all his demands and held on to the hope that he would revert to the caring and gentle person she initially fell in love with. Fabian's behavior became increasingly irritable, volatile, and aggressive. He emotionally drained Gabriella, progressing from verbal abuse to physical mistreatment. He would slap her, pull her hair, or grab her hands, often leaving no visible marks. However, bruises would occasionally appear on her wrists and shoulders, evidence of Fabian's rough handling. Gabriella tried to hide her situation, but her loved ones noticed her depressed state and frequent tears. She was no longer her usual cheerful and outgoing self, instead withdrawing from friends and avoiding contact with people Fabian had forbidden her from seeing. Gabriella repeatedly tried to end her relationship with Fabian, but he would not let her go. Despite her efforts to break free, he would pressure her into getting back together. This cycle of breaking up and reuniting continued for over a year, marked by Fabian's stalking, threats, and harassment. In 2017, Fabian got into trouble for physically attacking a classmate outside of school. Although the details of the incident were unclear, he was accused of mistreatment and assault, which could have led to jail time. However, the case was settled out of court, and Fabian was expelled from school. He was forced to complete his education through homeschooling. When Gabriella finally decided to end the relationship for good, Fabian became angry and desperate. He apologized and promised to change, begging her to take him back. However, when she refused, he began to stalk and harass her. He would show up at her school or home, even attempting to climb into her room through the window. He bombarded her with dozens of calls, texts, voice messages, and social media messages, trying to intimidate her into resuming their relationship. Gabriella was determined to end the relationship, despite Fabian's erratic behavior. His messages veered wildly from apologetic to threatening, but she remained resolute. However, Fabian's actions were unpredictable and frightening. He would often vanish for weeks, giving Gabriella a glimmer of hope that he had moved on, only to reappear and resume his harassment. Fabian's behavior was relentless and intrusive. He would follow Gabriella everywhere, showing up unexpectedly and causing public scenes. His outbursts were loud and intimidating, leaving Gabriella feeling anxious and fearful. As a result, she became reluctant to be alone, always seeking the company of friends or family after school. She would often meet her mother at work and travel home with her, or ask her father or uncle to accompany her on trips. This constant vigilance took a toll on Gabriella, leaving her exhausted and drained over several months. A devastating series of events began to unfold for the Elcano family when a burglar broke into the home of Federico's second wife, taking her life in a tragic turn of events. At the time, the children were at school and Federico was at work, leaving her alone and vulnerable. Fortunately, the perpetrator, a neighbor with a prior conviction, was apprehended immediately. Gabriella and her mother rallied around Federico, offering emotional support and helping him care for the children during this difficult time. Although Gabriella's thoughts were temporarily diverted from Fabian, who had gone missing around the same time, she remained focused on her own goals. She was busy preparing for entrance exams, hoping to secure a spot at one of Santiago's most prestigious universities, where she aspired to study journalism or advertising. However, this tragedy was only the beginning of a series of heartbreaking events that would soon befall the Elcano family. In May 2018, Fabian suddenly re-emerged, beginning a campaign of obsessive stalking that made Gabriella feel unsafe in all aspects of her life. He was able to access her property by climbing over the fence and even showed up at places she regularly visited, such as the supermarket and the mall. By early June, Gabriella was so alarmed by his behavior that she sent screenshots of her disturbing messages with Fabian to her two closest friends, including audio recordings where he explicitly threatened her and demanded they restart their relationship. Gabriella was secretly living in fear for her own safety and that of her loved ones, but she chose not to share her concerns with her family to avoid causing them unnecessary worry. On June 10, 2018, the Elcano family came together to celebrate a milestone birthday, Carlos's 80th. Tragically, this joyful gathering would turn out to be the last day of life for Gabriella and her mother, Carolina. The evening had begun on a happy note, with the house filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of a big family meal. As they celebrated Carlos's special day, everyone wished him good health and many more years to come. Gabriella played with her younger brothers and her uncle Rodrigo's children, but despite the festive atmosphere, she seemed somewhat preoccupied and distant. Her uncle noticed her unease and decided to approach her, asking if everything was okay and if something was troubling her. Gabriella gave a sad smile and shrugged, but didn't explain why she was nervous. Her uncle chose not to pry, thinking she would open up when she was ready. However, he later regretted not pressing her for more information. After the party, Federico drove his ex-wife and daughter home. He kissed Gabriella on the forehead, told her he loved her, and reassured her that she could always count on him for support. He then returned home with his younger children. Tragically, this was the last time he saw his eldest daughter and first wife alive. In the early hours of June 11th, a horrific crime took place. Fabian, armed with a hunting knife, climbed over the fence of his ex-girlfriend's house. He planned to sneak into Gabriella's bedroom through the window and attack her. However, just as he was about to enter, the lights turned on, and the back door creaked open. Carolina, who had been unable to sleep, had gotten up to investigate the noise. Fabian pounced on her, pushing her back inside, and began stabbing her repeatedly. Fabian brutally stabbed his Carolina 36 times, with most of the wounds inflicted on her chest, neck, and head. This attack was fatal and left her with no chance of survival. Carolina only managed to scream a couple of times before falling silent. The noise from the attack woke up Gabriella, who rushed downstairs to see what was happening. As she went down, she saw Fabian, covered in blood and clearly enraged. He caught hold of her and dragged her down. Gabriella was desperately trying to call the emergency services with her phone, but she couldn't make the call. In a horrific act, Fabian attacked Carolina and stabbed her once in the chest, piercing her heart and instantly killing her. He then moved her body to the kitchen. After the murder, Fabian tried to cover his tracks by wiping away his fingerprints and cleaning the bloody footprints. He also washed himself and the knife in the bathroom. After cleaning up, Fabian left the house quietly around 5:30 a.m. without being noticed by the neighbors. Following the event, Federico appeared unaffected. However, concerns grew when Carolina, typically a reliable and communicative colleague, missed work for 2 consecutive days without answering her phone. Her employer contacted Federico, asking him to find out what had happened to Carolina. When questioned, Federico was surprised and claimed to have called Carolina, but she was unreachable, as was Gabriella, whose phone was off. Next, Federico phoned his brother, Rodrigo, but Rodrigo stated that he had neither seen nor heard from the missing individuals since their friend's birthday. Following the phone call, Federico decided to pay a visit to Carolina's home. The property appeared uninhabited. Nonetheless, Carolina's vehicle remained in the garage. Without forcibly entering, despite possessing a spare key, Federico merely checked on the status of the property. Federico called the police and asked them to check the house, but he didn't enter himself because he was afraid of what he might find. The police officers were puzzled by this, especially since he had a key. When they finally entered the house at 11 a.m., they found the lifeless bodies of Carolina and Gabriella on the kitchen floor, surrounded by pools of blood. Despite the obvious fact that the women had been dead for over a day, Federico was overcome with grief and irrationally demanded that the police call an ambulance to save them. The police had to calm Federico down, but his behavior raised suspicions, and they took him outside to a police car for questioning. When he tried to leave the car and found the door locked, he became agitated and demanded to know why. It was then that he realized he was the main suspect in the double homicide. Federico was shocked and devastated by this turn of events, unable to comprehend how he could be suspected of killing his own daughter. Rodrigo arrived shortly after and was equally shocked to learn that his brother had not been released. He was also struggling to come to terms with the investigation revealed that Gabriella's friends reported that she was being stalked by her ex-boyfriend, Fabian. Screenshots of his threatening messages and voice recordings, which included a disturbing phrase, "It's easier to take her life than to let her go," were also obtained. This came as a shock to Federico, Gabriella's father, who recalled that Fabian seemed pleasant when they first met, despite his daughter's failed attempts to break up with him. The contrast between the heinous crime and the normalcy of Fabian's daily life, where he spent time with family and friends and posted light-hearted photos on social media, made his crime all the more inconceivable. After being taken into custody, Fabian responded to allegations with pretended astonishment and anguish, falsely claiming his innocence and feigning affection for Gabriella. Fabian had gotten rid of the object used to commit the murder and thrown away some clothes with blood on them. However, there were still small drops of blood on his shoes, and footprints matching his shoes were found at the scene of the crime. Additionally, 4 of Gabriella's classmates said they heard Fabian threaten her, saying it would be easier to kill her than let her go. Because of the evidence and what the witnesses said, Fabian admitted to the crime, but tried to make himself look like a lover who was deeply hurt. The defendant claimed that his intention was not to harm Gabriella, but rather to have a conversation with her. However, the situation escalated, and he ultimately treated her mother as an unwanted witness. He struggled to provide a reasonable explanation for bringing a hunting knife to the encounter, which was supposedly meant to be a conversation. Following the autopsy and other necessary examinations, the victims' bodies were released to their family for burial. A large crowd gathered at the funeral to pay their respects to the deceased and offer condolences to their loved ones. Gabriella was laid to rest in a white dress she had always wanted to wear but never had the chance to. Coralina was buried in a closed casket due to the severe mutilation of her face. Fabian's family hired a skilled lawyer who developed a strong defense strategy, aiming to secure a minimal sentence for his client. During the initial court hearings, the lawyer highlighted Fabian's young age and clean record, pointing out that the attack on his classmate had been resolved outside of court. However, the victim's family pushed for a more severe charge of femicide, which was rejected by the prosecution due to the specific requirements of Chile's law. Since Fabian and the victim were not in a romantic relationship at the time of the crime, the case did not meet the criteria for femicide. The lawyer also argued that Fabian had acted on impulse and was in a state of distress when he committed the crime. As a result, Fabian faced a potential 15-year sentence for the double homicide and assault charges. The victim's family, understandably, demanded the maximum punishment for Fabian. After the initial hearings, the judge gave both the prosecution and defense 6 months to gather evidence. Fabian's lawyer requested his release pending trial, but the judge denied this request, keeping Fabian in custody. Gabriella's father was furious. He lost 2 loved ones to violent deaths. Now, the person responsible for the murders of his ex-wife and daughter might receive a lenient sentence. The defense lawyer tried to blame the victims, and the authorities seemed willing to accept this excuse. In response, Gabriella's father and uncle, along with women's rights groups, proposed Gabriella's Law. This law would broaden the definition of femicide to include intimate partner violence, regardless of whether they was married or cohabiting. The National Office for Women and Gender Equality soon joined the cause, actively pushing for the law. Although the bill faced opposition due to concerns that it could lead to new charges and stricter penalties for perpetrators already in prison, feminist groups nationwide rallied behind the Alino family. They organized marches and demonstrations in support of Gabriella's Law. In August 2019, a year and 3 months after the tragic murders, significant changes were made to Chile's femicide law. Known as Gabriella's Law, these amendments aimed to strengthen the country's response to violence against women. The law now defines femicide as any act of violence, injury, or murder committed against a woman due to hatred based on her gender, regardless of the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. Additionally, the law considers it an aggravating circumstance if the victim is a minor or has health issues. In April 2022, Fabian Ceres went on trial for attacking his ex-girlfriend and her mother 4 years earlier. Thanks to Gabriella's Law, the defense had limited options. Fabian was charged with femicide under aggravating circumstances because one of the victims was a minor, as well as with double homicide and assault. On April 20th, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was delivered, Federico and Rodrigo spoke to the court, expressing their gratitude to the judges for their fair decision. They acknowledged that no punishment could restore the life of their loved ones, Carolina and Gabriella, but emphasized that a life sentence for the perpetrator would serve as a safeguard, protecting other women from suffering a similar tragic fate. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Borden family. Michael and Catherine met in school, bonding over homework and walks. They became inseparable friends, sharing secrets and learning from each other. Their friendship blossomed into romance, and Michael eventually asked Catherine on a date, declaring his love. They got married in a beautiful ceremony, vowing to love each other through life's ups and downs. After 10 years, the Borden family moved to Lititz, Pennsylvania, a peaceful town founded by the Moravian Church in 1756. The town's faithful residents, including Amish families, sought refuge from modern chaos, living simply and avoiding modern tech. The devout Bordens chose Lititz for its ideal setting to raise children, surrounded by calm and serenity. Michael was an active member of the local church community, where he taught Sunday school lessons. His wife Catherine managed the household and supported him in his community work. While he focused on spiritual growth, Michael also worked as a manager at a printing company to provide for their everyday needs. Over time, they had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Large families like theirs were common in Lititz, where parents hoped to protect their children from the outside world's hardships and dangers. Regular church attendance, youth groups, and homeschooling were a big part of family life. Interactions between families were mostly limited to religious gatherings and celebrations. Michael and his wife built a peaceful home life, raising their kids in faith and discipline. When their eldest sons left for university, the three younger kids continued homeschooling, pleasing their parents. Neighbors and friends praised the kind, responsive, and interesting kids: Kara, Caitlin, and Daniel. Kara, the eldest daughter, challenged traditional values in her teens. Despite her dad's disapproval, she joined the soccer team, snuck out to discos, and did forbidden things. Her dad was troubled, and talks often ended in arguments and her running away. Kara sought romantic relationships and showed interest in boys. In 2005, David, 18, and Kara, 14, connected at a homeschooling support group. They formed a close bond, hiding it from their parents, and used social media to exchange messages, pouring their hearts out. They crafted coded messages to keep their communication private. Kara and David's letter exchange wasn't enough, so they secretly met in person. At first, they took innocent walks, but their friendship blossomed into romance. They snuck out to discos, spending nights together. David, older, had experienced first love, while Kara's inexperience made her feelings overwhelming. Her joy was radiant, but her obedience to her parents was feigned, driven by fear of discovery. But sooner or later, every secret is exposed. One day, Kara couldn't keep her secret hidden anymore and confided in her sister. She showed her a photo of David, told her about how they met and how they were deeply in love and willing to overcome all obstacles to be together. They were even planning to run away to be together. However, Kara's sister was worried about her and told their mother about their planned elopement, which ultimately revealed the secret of the young lovers. One early morning, Kara snuck back home, feeling elated after her date with David. But her mother was waiting in her room, clearly aware of her secret. At breakfast, Kara's parents forbade her from seeing David, deeming him unsuitable due to their concerns about violence and drugs. Angry and disappointed, Kara's father grounded her. That night, Kara spent her free time at David's house. At 5:30 a.m., David drove Kara back to her neighborhood and dropped her off near her house. They agreed that once Kara was safely back in her room, she would send him a text message to let him know she was okay. However, the message never came. David tried calling her home phone several times and sent her a few messages on social media, but he didn't hear back from her. An hour later, Kara finally got in touch with him, explaining that she had gotten caught by her parents and asked him to come over so they could talk to him. David arrived on time, but Kara's parents were fiercely opposed. Her dad forbade David from seeing Kara, deeming her too young for a relationship. David's declarations of love fell flat, with her dad threatening to call the police if he saw them together again. The emotional confrontation ended with Kara grounded and David leaving, feeling rejected and heartbroken for the first time. The lovers' separation was agonizing. They devised a plan to deceive everyone by pretending to break up while secretly continuing their affair. In public, they convincingly played the part of former lovers, not even greeting each other. Kara's parents were convinced they'd protected her from a youthful mistake. However, David missed Kara terribly, often reading Shakespeare and imagining openly serenading her like Romeo. David Ludwig took drastic measures by calling Kara's home to request a meeting with her father, Michael. On November 13, 2015, the young man arrived at the Borden residence, determined to discuss their plans to get married. Ludwig confessed his love for Kara and their intentions to Michael, but he received a dismissive response, saying it would never happen. Prepared for this reaction, Ludwig, fueled by anger, pulled out a handgun and shot Michael in the back as he walked towards the front door. Next, he targeted Kara's mother, Catherine, shooting her while she sat in a chair. Ludwig then searched the house for Kara, calling out her name, but she was nowhere to be found. He got into his car, started the engine, and began to drive away. That's when he spotted Kara running down the road towards him. She got into the car, expressing her desire to escape and start a new life with David. They fled the city in David's red car, leaving the chaos behind. Cara Borden was missing for 24 hours after her parents, Michael and Catherine Borden, were found dead. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, which led them to track the teenagers. The footage also showed that Cara didn't resist and had willingly gone with David Ludwig. As a result, the charges against Ludwig for abducting Cara were dropped. Alerts were issued to police across the East, including in Pennsylvania and Indiana, as the couple was spotted heading west in a red Volkswagen Jetta. On Monday morning, authorities received a tip about a vehicle matching the description parked near a truck stop outside Fort Wayne. Police rushed to the area, but the car was already gone. State police were alerted, and they spotted the car around noon on Interstate 70 in Belleville. David Ludwig got onto the interstate, leading police on a high-speed chase at 90 to 95 miles per hour on a two-lane highway. According to State Trooper David Couch, who was involved in the pursuit, Ludwig drove extremely recklessly and dangerously, causing multiple accidents, much like in an action movie. The district attorney announced that, despite the initial kidnapping charge being dropped, they would still face charges for the brutal murder of Michael and Catherine Borden. David Ludwig and Cara Beth Borden went on the run following the tragic incident, evading authorities for approximately 28 hours before being apprehended in Indiana. While Cara Beth was not charged with any crime, David Ludwig was detained without bail, facing charges of murder and abduction. In the aftermath, Cara was taken in by relatives and church members for care. David Ludwig was arrested on November 14, 2005, following a high-speed chase that ended with his vehicle crashing into a tree. He was charged with the murder of the Bordens, a crime allegedly committed after a prolonged dispute. Ludwig confessed to 2 counts of intentional harm, stating that he had deliberately intended to shoot the Bordens if they got in his way, and that he did so. During a search of his vehicle after his arrest, no weapons were found. However, when the police searched his home, they discovered an arsenal of 54 firearms, which belonged to his father, a hunter who had taught Ludwig how to handle weapons. The police also found an 18-minute video on a laptop in his home, which showed Ludwig discussing plans to invade another family's home, armed with weapons. The plan was abandoned due to the presence of too many cars. Although the police declared Cara Borden a victim in the case, Ludwig claimed that surveillance footage from various stores along their route would prove that she was not abducted. He did not resist extradition to Pennsylvania, and a judge ordered him held without bail. Ludwig was not represented by an attorney during the charge presentation, and a preliminary hearing was set for November 23rd. The trial of Ludwig, who was responsible for the deaths of 2 adults in front of their children, was brief, as detailed in court documents. Caitlin, Cara's 13-year-old sister, told investigators that her parents were killed after arguing with David Ludwig for about an hour. According to Caitlin, Ludwig shot her father, and she then ran to the bathroom where she heard a second shot, which likely killed her mother. Afterwards, Ludwig ran through the house, calling out to Cara. In June 2006, David Ludwig agreed to a plea deal with District Attorney Donald R. Totaro, who had originally sought the death penalty. As a result, Ludwig pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, among other charges, and was immediately sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences of 9.5 to 19 years. He was also ordered to pay $125,000 in restitution. Since 2006, Cara Borden has been under guardianship, represented by legal counsel. In November 2005, it was reported that the charge of abduction against David G. Ludwig was dropped. The court concluded that Cara had voluntarily left with Ludwig, as supported by written statements. Ludwig's lawyer claimed that Cara had accompanied David voluntarily during their journey through 3 states, and surveillance footage showed that she had multiple opportunities to escape. Cara herself admitted that she had run after Ludwig as he left her house. Cara Beth Borden was identified as a victim in this tragic situation, and as a result, The Lancaster County District Attorney did not file criminal charges against her. This decision was influenced by her actions during the investigation and the digital evidence collected from emails, blogs, and texts exchanged with Ludwig. A memorial service was held at Lancaster Bible College, where Cara Beth, surrounded by her siblings, mourned the loss of her parents. As a sign of respect and remembrance, the neighborhood adorned their mailboxes with white ribbons. This tragedy left 5 children without the guidance and love of their parents. David Ludwig was transferred to Indiana's State Correctional Institution at Pine Grove to serve his life sentence for murdering his girlfriend's parents. He was chosen for the prison's youthful offender program, designed for inmates 15 to 20, which focuses on teaching self-responsibility, discipline, and respect for others. David Ludwig, now 37, is serving 2 life sentences for fatally shooting Michael and Catherine Borden in 2005 after they barred him from seeing their 14-year-old daughter. He cited the 2012 U.S. Supreme Court ruling against life imprisonment for minors, but the PA Supreme Court denied his petition, agreeing with a lower court that he's not entitled to same consideration since he was 18 at the time. David Ludwig will spend life in prison. The community struggled to understand how well-raised kids committed evil. Despite Christian homeschooling, tragedy struck, leaving questions if parents overlooked or failed to convey values. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sierra Jugan. Sierra Jugan was a young woman who captivated everyone with her joyful personality. Her happy and humorous nature made her the center of attention wherever she went. She had a lively, cheeky personality that brought immense happiness to those around her. Even when she made mistakes, she had a special way of making her mom smile. As Sierra entered high school, she continued to showcase her adventurous spirit. She boldly took on new experiences, including playing volleyball. Whether on or off the court, she displayed a remarkable level of comfort and confidence. On July 19, 2016, the Jen family returned from their vacation and began unpacking. Sierra was looking forward to the fall semester at the University of TU, where she planned to study abroad. Her mom wanted to discuss her plans with her, but Sierra, being an athletic person, was eager to try out her new bike. So whenever she had the time, she was keen to take a ride. Before leaving the house, Sierra told her mom that she was heading to her boyfriend Josh's house. Her mom acknowledged her plans and told her she would see her later, around 1:05 p.m. Sierra looked cute, with her hair tied up in a ponytail, wearing shorts and a tank top as she set out on her ride. Josh, Sierra's boyfriend, called her home phone because he was worried about her whereabouts. He had tried calling her phone several times, but it kept going straight to voicemail. When Josh asked Sierra's mom if she was home, she said no. Josh told Sierra's mom that Sierra had left his house around 7 p.m., and he hadn't seen or heard from her since then. Sierra's mom knew something was wrong because Sierra always answered her phone. Her first thought was to call Sierra's grandparents who lived nearby, but they said Sierra wasn't with them. Sierra's family and Josh started searching for her, worried about her safety. Sierra's mom quickly got in her car and started driving around, looking carefully at every possible place Sierra could be, including the sides of the road. Sierra's aunt, uncle, and cousin also joined the search, thinking Sierra might have been in an accident and got hit by a car. As time went by, worry grew. The possibility of Sierra being hurt, maybe with a broken leg, weighed heavily on their minds. Despite their relentless efforts and exhaustive search, they couldn't find any trace of Sierra. When Sierra's mom got home, she immediately took to social media, reaching out to Sierra's friends, desperately hoping someone had seen or heard from her. But to her dismay, there was complete silence. Hours passed, and still, there was no sign of Sierra. Filled with worry, Sierra's mom knew every minute counted and decided to call the police. Just an hour later, a concerned neighbor called Sierra's family saying County Road 6 was blocked off. With their hearts racing, Sierra's family rushed out to see what was happening. They were met by a chaotic scene surrounded by officers who refused to let them through. The officers stayed tight-lipped about Sierra, leaving her mom in a state of panic. She couldn't help but wonder if the police had found her missing daughter. The small-town police officers, seeking answers, decided to seek the FBI's assistance. They promised to deliver any information they could to Sierra's family as soon as possible. Understandably, the family found themselves unable to sleep, remaining wide awake and contemplating their next course of action. The following day, Sierra's mom and aunt took matters into their own hands, refusing to wait for answers. Her mom made a series of calls to hospitals, desperately searching for any signs of an unidentified female patient that might be Sierra. Despite call after call, they turned up nothing, leaving them feeling increasingly hopeless. A lead emerged from Detroit, Michigan, offering a glimmer of hope in the search for Sierra. A young woman, bearing a striking resemblance to her, had been admitted to a hospital with severe injuries, including numerous broken bones, after escaping from a moving vehicle with no identification. In an effort to confirm her identity, a nurse asked Sierra's family to describe any distinguishing marks on her body. Sierra's mom recalled a scar on her calf and a pierced belly button, which seemed to match the hospitalized girl's features, raising the family's hopes that they had finally found Sierra. Unfortunately, their hopes were soon dashed when they discovered that the girl in the hospital was not Sierra, leaving the family devastated and heartbroken after investing so much hope and anticipation in the possibility. Later that morning, the police visited Sierra's house to brief them on the previous night's events. One of the officers had found a trampled cornfield near where he'd parked his car and approached the area. He noticed signs of a struggle and a motorcycle track inside the cornfield. Not wanting to disturb any potential evidence, he backed away without touching anything. As he retreated, he caught a glimpse of a reflection: Sierra's purple bike. Further investigation uncovered several items at the scene: a pair of men's sunglasses, a pair of women's sunglasses, a blood-stained sock, and a screwdriver. Based on these discoveries, the police concluded that Sierra was likely abducted from that location. During the investigation, detectives thoroughly questioned Sierra's friends and family to gather information about her boyfriend Josh. They learned that Sierra and Josh had been inseparable since they were 7 years old, and their friendship developed into a romantic relationship in their first year of high school. The couple was known for their energetic and carefree nature, sharing a passion for skiing, among other things. After high school, Sierra went to the University of Toledo, while Josh enrolled at Bowling Green, but despite the physical distance, their commitment to each other remained strong. They often talked about getting married in the future, although Sierra emphasized her priority on completing her education before settling down, showcasing her academic dedication. Detectives investigating the case found that Sierra had visited Josh's house in the early afternoon on July 19th. According to the gathered information, Sierra decided to leave Josh's house and head home around 6:30 p.m. Because he was worried about her safety, Josh joined Sierra on her ride home, riding alongside her on his motorcycle. After a few miles, Sierra told Josh to turn back and go home, wanting to ride her bike alone and prove her independence. Josh reluctantly agreed, and they parted ways, with Josh heading back on his motorcycle and Sierra continuing her ride. During the investigation, detectives discovered motorcycle tracks in the nearby corn stalks, not far from Sierra's bike. This raised the question of whether these tracks belonged to Josh's motorcycle, and detectives couldn't ignore the possible connection. They began a thorough investigation to determine if there was any evidence linking Josh to the scene where Sierra went missing. As a result, detectives set up a command post to gather all relevant clues about Sierra's disappearance. A promising lead emerged quickly. A local resident came forward, saying that on July 14th, while driving, he saw a motorcycle helmet on the side of the road. He asked his son to retrieve it and put it in their truck. Later, After learning about Sierra's disappearance, he examined the helmet more closely and found red stains, which he suspected were blood. The helmet was discovered near the cornfield where Sierra's bike was found. The detectives asked Josh about his helmet, and to their relief, he produced it, confirming he had it with him. Furthermore, they verified that Josh had returned home after the interview with his parents, ruling him out as a suspect due to his solid alibi. Despite being visibly shaken, Josh was not suspected by Sierra's family in connection with her disappearance. The detectives focused on identifying the owner of a blood-stained motorcycle helmet found on the roadside. Recognizing the significance of DNA evidence, they sent the helmet to the crime lab for testing, awaiting the results with anticipation, hoping for a breakthrough in their investigation. Community unites in search for Sierra, organizing parties to scour every area for clues. Townspeople work together, fueled by a deep sense of unity, to bring her home safely. Hundreds gather at a candlelight vigil, sending thoughts and prayers for her return. 2 days after Sierra vanished, the police got a tip about a suspicious van speeding through the area where she was last seen. People thought she might have been kidnapped and forced into sex trafficking. The tipster gave the police the van's license plate number. The police interviewed the van's owner, but it turned out the van had nothing to do with Sierra's disappearance. The owner explained that he sped up because another car suddenly appeared from behind, which might have been a family member looking for Sierra, and he panicked. By the 48-hour mark, the investigation had turned up no leads on Sierra's whereabouts. As time goes on, her family is struggling to stay hopeful. With each passing day, the chances of finding her alive get smaller and smaller. Despite trying to stay positive, the harsh reality of the situation is getting harder to ignore. The police went from door to door searching for Sierra, and their investigation eventually took them to a farm near where her bike was found. The farm, which covered an acre of land, had several buildings including a small house, a trailer, and a large barn. The owner of the property was James Worley. When the police arrived at the farm, they started talking to James Worley. They asked him about the day Sierra went missing, hoping he could tell them something about her disappearance. But what James said shocked them. He told them he had been out riding his motorcycle that day, but it broke down, and he lost some things along the way, including a screwdriver and his helmet. This was surprising because those were the same items found at the scene where Sierra was taken. By saying this, James had unintentionally put himself at the scene of the crime, which made the detectives very suspicious of him and his connection to Sierra's disappearance. The police were determined to delve deeper into their investigation, and they questioned James Worley. During the questioning, they noticed something that caught their attention: scratches on his face. It was clear that he had been involved in a struggle, and this discovery only increased their suspicions about him, raising more questions. The detectives wondered if these scratches were the result of a confrontation with the missing girl, Sierra. After questioning James Worley about Sierra's disappearance, the detectives returned to the police station. They decided to conduct a background check on him, hoping to uncover relevant information as they looked into his past. But what they discovered sent chills down their spines. James Worley had a dark criminal history, including a previous attempt to abduct a young woman 26 years earlier on July 4, 1989. The woman's name was Robin Garter. On July 4, 1989, 26-year-old Robin Garter was getting ready to attend a neighborhood picnic. While her mother was busy preparing potato salad and making final arrangements for the event, Robin decided to squeeze in a bike ride beforehand. However, she had forgotten to bring water and was now struggling with the intense heat. As she considered turning back home to quench her thirst, Robin heard the sound of a car approaching from behind. Robin thought that after the vehicle passed her, she would head back home. But before she could react, the car crashed into her bike, sending her flying into a nearby ditch. She was stunned and disoriented. The driver stopped and got out. looking concerned and trying to figure out what had happened. But then things took a dark turn. The person who had hit her suddenly revealed sinister intentions. Without warning, he hit her hard on the back of the head. As she struggled to understand what was happening, the attacker held a screwdriver to her throat, threatening to kill her in a menacing tone. He ordered her to get up and get into his car right away. The man forced Robin into his car at screwdriver point, trying to handcuff her once she was inside. He managed to cuff one wrist, but Robin fought back fiercely, preventing him from cuffing the other. She screamed for help at the top of her lungs, but her cries were drowned out by the empty cornfields, with no one around to hear her. Robin's fierce resistance against her attacker left her on the brink of unconsciousness multiple times, but she refused to give up. Just as the silence was becoming unsettling, she picked up the faint sound of a motorcycle in the distance. As she strained her eyes, she saw it approaching the car where her captor was. Realizing this might be her only chance to escape, Robin waved her arms wildly to get the rider's attention. Luckily, the rider noticed her distress signals and brought the motorcycle to a stop. In a desperate bid for help, Robin explained that the man was trying to kill her. Without hesitation, she seized the opportunity and quickly climbed onto the back of the motorcycle, leaving her captor and the car behind. The motorcycle rider drove Robin home, where she collapsed. Robin's mother called the police and an ambulance, and Robin was rushed to the hospital for medical treatment. The motorcyclist, determined to help the authorities, led the police back to the scene of the incident. To their surprise, they found James Worley still present, waiting with his car. When questioned, James was fully cooperative and provided identification to prove who he was. However, his version of events differed significantly from initial assumptions. James strongly denied any intention of kidnapping Robin. According to his account, Robin was riding her bike erratically, swerving into the road, making it impossible for him to avoid hitting her. James claimed that after the accident, Robin became hysterical, and he restrained her with handcuffs not to harm her, but to secure her to the steering wheel of his truck while he sought help. He insisted his actions were driven by genuine concern for Robin's well-being. James Worley was arrested in 1989 for trying to abduct Robin. He was found guilty of abduction and sentenced to 6 to 10 years in the state prison in Mansfield, Ohio. Due to good behavior, he was released 3 years later. When Robin found out that James was released, she was terrified. The fear of James potentially striking again weighed heavily on her mind. With information about James Worley's criminal history in hand, the police obtained a search warrant and went to his home. When they arrived, they started searching the house, which James shared with his mother. At first, everything seemed normal. Next, they turned their attention to the large backyard, methodically searching the outdoor area. The officers then discovered a barn located in the corner of the yard, which sparked their curiosity. They approached the structure cautiously. Inside the barn, the police found stacks of hay bales. They searched the barn carefully, looking for any evidence that might connect James to Cece's disappearance. The detectives examined every nook and cranny, checking each bale of hay for hidden items or clues. As they removed the bales of hay from James Worley's barn, the detectives noticed a small green crate in the corner. They approached it cautiously and opened it, finding bags of underwear, stockings, and tube tops. Each item was neatly labeled and sealed in a plastic Ziploc bag. As the detectives searched through the items, they were shocked to see a pair of purple panties with what looked like bloodstains. This discovery filled them with a sense of dread, and they wondered what other disturbing things they might find in their search of James Worley's barn. The detectives quickly spotted a piece of plywood on the ground and recognized its potential importance. They carefully lifted the plywood, exposing a small freezer buried in the barn. When they opened the freezer, they were met with a strong, unpleasant smell, similar to bleach, which heightened their suspicions. As they continued their investigation, they found other disturbing objects hidden behind hay bales, including a stained air mattress that hinted at a dark history. The presence of zip ties, duct tape, handcuffs, and keys added to their concerns, as these items are commonly used in abductions and other criminal activities. The detectives decided to send all the items taken from the property for DNA testing. Worley attempted to explain the items as part of a porn business he claimed to be planning, but the evidence against him was too strong to ignore. The combination of the disturbing discoveries at the crime scene and the incriminating items led to James's arrest for Sierra's murder. Sierra's family was stunned to learn that her abductor was someone who lived far away from her home. This news sparked a million questions in her mind, with the most pressing one being where she was. The detectives launched a thorough investigation of James's property, meticulously searching every inch of it and leaving no stone unturned. They brought in cadaver dogs to help detect any potential remains. The detectives focused on a pond on the property, recognizing its potential significance. They carefully drained it to uncover any evidence hidden beneath the water's surface. They also inspected the insulation in the front of the attic. As the investigation progressed, they extended their search to the neighboring properties, considering the possibility that evidence might have been dispersed beyond James's property. They pursued leads in all directions, diligence and thoroughness guiding their efforts. A farmer was walking through his vast field when he received a call. As he walked, he noticed a peculiar area of corn that was matted down and decided to take a closer look. When he approached the spot, he saw a nearby mound of dirt, which immediately made him think it could be a grave. This worried him even more because of the recent search for Sierra. With this on his mind, he quickly called the police, telling them about his suspicions and giving them the exact location. Responding promptly to the farmer's distress call, the police arrived at the scene. They noticed a fresh pile of dirt, which fueled their suspicion that it could be a grave. Taking the situation seriously, they began processing the area carefully to avoid disturbing any potential evidence. The officers examined every inch of the scene, hoping to find clues about Sierra's whereabouts. However, despite their thorough efforts, their search yielded no results. The detectives then searched the adjoining farms for Sierra, using drones and helicopters to cover a larger area and increase their chances of locating her. During their search, they found another mound of dirt with freshly matted corn. Their trained dogs detected the scent of decomposition, suggesting a potential crime scene. As the crime scene investigators dug, they made a grim discovery. They found human remains. Based on the evidence, it was believed to be Sierra's body. Tragically, her hands were bound behind her back, and her feet were tied to the handcuffs. Further examination revealed that an object was lodged in her mouth, restricting her airway, which ultimately led to her death. Later that night, the Sierra family received a devastating call they had been fearing. The police had found Sierra's lifeless body. The news was met with an overwhelming outpouring of grief as the entire family broke down in tears. The sorrow felt by each family member was palpable, and the weight of the moment was crushing. A month after Sierra's tragic abduction and murder, James Worley was charged with 19 counts, including kidnapping and aggravated murder. 2 years later, Worley's trial began. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, he pleaded not guilty to all charges. Over 8 intense days, the prosecution presented a gripping story that captivated the jury and spectators alike. After deliberating for 6 hours, the jury found Worley guilty on all counts related to Sierra's murder. The severity of the crime led to Worley being sentenced to death. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Amanda Anderson. In 2010, 19-year-old Amanda Anderson resided with her family in New Chapel Hill, Texas, a small city with a population of less than 1,000 people, approximately 100 miles from Dallas. The events that unfolded in her life shocked not only her family, but also everyone who became aware of the details of this case. The incident instilled fear in the community, causing residents who previously felt safe enough to leave their front doors unlocked at night to change their habit. Amanda Elizabeth Anderson was born on October 10, 1990, in Fridley, Minnesota, to Mark and Stacy Kennedy Anderson. She graduated with honors from Tyler Gospel Chapel School in 2009. At the time of her death, Amanda was employed by Trinity Mother Francis and was a student at Tyler Junior College, where she was majoring in English literature. With a passion for writing, music, and life, Amanda had a bright future ahead of her. Tragically, her life was cut short on September 15, 2010, leaving her family to face the devastating consequences. Amanda was found dead at the family home in New Chapel Hill. Her 15-year-old brother, Nate Anderson, made a 911 call after returning home and discovering a shock. In his conversation with the dispatcher, Nate explained that he had been doing homework but was getting stressed because he couldn't find the answers to his questions, so he decided to take a quick jog in the nearby woods, a routine he followed occasionally. When he returned, he found the garage door had been kicked open. Nate began by searching his own room, then moved on to Amanda's room. It was only afterwards that he stumbled upon his sister's lifeless body lying on the floor. A horrific discovery. When the dispatcher inquired about the front or back door being kicked in, Nate clarified that it was actually the garage door that had been forced open, likely because it was the most commonly used entrance. Nate was crying, and the dispatcher asked him to calm down, explaining that police and his parents were on their way. The dispatcher then asked if Nate had touched anything in the house, and he said no. About 2 minutes into their conversation, Nate explained to the dispatcher how he'd found Amanda, describing a bullet hole and stating his belief that there were a couple of them in her head. When the investigators arrived at the crime scene, Nate recounted the same details he had provided to the dispatcher during the 911 call. He explained that he had returned home to find his door kicked open, and to his horror, discovered his deceased sister. Overwhelmed with grief, Nate was inconsolable, crying almost continuously as he struggled to come to terms with the shocking fact that someone had shot and killed his sister. During the crime scene examination, the criminologist determined that Amanda was seated on her bed in her bedroom when she was shot, causing her to fall to the floor. The absence of a crime weapon and shell casings at the scene suggests that the perpetrator either removed the casings before fleeing or used a revolver, which would not eject casings. Amanda's parents were devastated when they learned what had happened to their daughter. As deeply religious people, they struggled to comprehend how anyone could commit such an act against someone as innocent and kind-hearted as Amanda, who had only recently graduated from high school and was still figuring out her path in life. She was a gentle soul who wished no harm to anyone and had no enemies. Nate's grandparents recalled that his world was shattered the day Amanda died. He was overcome with grief in the police car, sobbing uncontrollably, and they had to extract him and cradle him in their arms. According to them, Nate had an extraordinary love and devotion for his sister, and discovering her in such a distressed state was utterly unbearable. The investigators canvassed the neighborhood where the crime took place, speaking with residents to gather more information about Amanda and her family. Uniformly, those interviewed described the Andersons as a tight-knit and religious family. One neighbor offered his theory about what might have happened to Amanda. According to him, the area was previously quiet and crime-free, but about 2 weeks prior to Amanda's death, a house in the area was robbed. It's possible that the same person was involved in what happened to Amanda, and that they saw Nate Anderson go out for a run. The perpetrator might have then broken into the Andersons' house, and Amanda might have stumbled upon the scene, becoming a witness. This could be why the robber decided to kill her. To determine if Amanda's death was connected to an attempted robbery, the investigators required evidence. When caught by homeowners, robbers will often take drastic measures to prevent them from notifying the police. However, in this instance, nothing was stolen from the Anderson family home. Despite the opportunity, The perpetrator left Amanda's room untouched, with valuables like jewelry and a laptop remaining in place, unaffected by the intruder. Amanda's father, Mark, conducted a thorough search of the house and reported to the investigators that nothing was missing. Given this, the investigators began to question whether they were dealing with a robbery gone wrong. They found it puzzling that an intruder who broke into the house to steal valuables and encountered Amanda would feel the need to shoot her multiple times. This led them to suspect that the motive behind the crime was not robbery. Amanda's room was not the only area the forensics team scrutinized for clues. They conducted a thorough search of the entire house, gathering fingerprints and hair samples in the hopes of finding traces left by someone who didn't live there. Additionally, they collected Nate's clothing as evidence, given that he was the first to discover Amanda's body. Although an initial inspection of Nate's clothes revealed no signs of blood, consistent with his 911 call assertion that he hadn't touched anything, the police still submitted his garments to the lab for analysis, along with other evidence. This was a standard procedure to rule out family members as potential suspects. The investigators requested that Mark Anderson, Amanda's father, reveal all the weapons present in the house. As was common in Texas, the Anderson family possessed an array of guns. Although they weren't enthusiastic hunters, they occasionally practiced shooting. Following Mark Anderson's directions, the police discovered the weapons and confiscated over 10 distinct types of pistols and rifles, as well as multiple revolvers, from the residence. The police initially considered the possibility of criminal gang activity as a potential motive for the crime, but they quickly ruled it out since they had no suspects and the motive remained unclear. Additionally, their informants did not provide any useful leads. On September 17, 2010, Amanda's family struggled to come to terms with the devastating loss they had suffered. Meanwhile, investigators worked to identify those responsible for the crime. 2 days later, the police received the autopsy results, which revealed that Amanda had been shot 4 times, with all 4 wounds located in the head. What was unusual about the attack was that each shot would have been fatal, yet the perpetrator did not stop after the first shot and instead pulled the trigger 3 more times. The placement of the bullet wounds on Amanda's head was particularly noteworthy. The perpetrator used a small caliber pistol and fired multiple shots. 2 wounds were located on top of her head, another was near the right temple, and the 4th was directly on the forehead. All the wounds, except for the one on the right temple, showed a top-to-bottom trajectory. The exception, the right temple wound, had a bullet that entered at a 90-degree angle. These unusual wound patterns suggested that Amanda's death was more akin to an execution. Amanda's death was caused by .22 caliber bullets. Since there were no gunpowder marks around her head wounds, it's clear the shooter was at least a yard away. Forensic analysis led investigators to believe Amanda was familiar with her killer. They based this conclusion on 2 key facts. Firstly, Amanda was using her laptop while sitting on her bed when she was shot, implying she felt comfortable and didn't perceive a threat. Secondly, the shooter was standing right next to her. If Amanda didn't know the person, she would have likely reacted to their presence, but instead, she did nothing, suggesting she trusted the perpetrator and didn't anticipate being shot. The investigators looked beyond the Anderson family home for answers to their questions. At Amanda's college, they spoke with her friends, among whom her best friend revealed that Amanda was not the type to interact with strangers, avoided illegal activities, and therefore did not have ties to the criminal underworld. Additionally, she did not have any enemies at college. But what if someone had been secretly watching Amanda and plotting against her? The investigators collaborated with college security to uncover any suspicious incidents involving Amanda or other students over the past year. But this avenue led nowhere. A week after Amanda's death, the police were still without a motive, suspects, or answers for her family. As the family grieved, the locals of New Chapel Hill lived in fear for their lives. desperate to uncover the truth behind the tragedy. Amanda's father, Mark Anderson, expressed his despair, saying he doubted whether there would be a wedding or his wife would get to experience her pregnancy together with their daughter, and all the joys that come with it. Shortly after, a reward was offered to anyone with information that could aid the investigation, in the hope that it would encourage someone who knew something to come forward and share their knowledge with the police. Shortly after, the police station began to receive calls offering tips, but most of these were speculative and ultimately hindered the investigation rather than helping it. The process of verifying all the incoming information was time-consuming, but unfortunately, it failed to yield the desired outcome. Each and every lead ultimately ended in a dead end. The police decided to re-interview the Anderson family, focusing on Amanda's personal life, as the nature and number of wounds suggested a potentially personal motive for the crime. Amanda's mother was at a loss as to who could have committed such a heinous act, describing her daughter as a regular church attendee and an excellent student who always treated others with kindness. According to her mother, Amanda did not have a boyfriend at the time of her death, although she had briefly seen someone around a year prior. However, the relationship had fizzled out, and as far as her mother knew, they had not been in contact since. The police wanted to track down this man to determine the nature of his relationship with Amanda, the reasons behind their breakup, and whether he had any motive to harm her. According to him, he and Amanda shared some classes and occasionally went to the movies with friends, but he claimed they were never in a romantic relationship. They had gone out together on several occasions, but nothing more developed from it. When questioned about the last time he saw Amanda, he stated that he had seen her the day before her death, and she was on her way to pick up Nate from church. This was the extent of what the investigators learned, and it appeared to be another dead end. They decided to go back to the start and re-examine all the evidence, as it all began with Nate's 911 call. They focused on this call once again. In the conversation, Nate claimed he had not entered his sister's room and that someone had shot Amanda. When the dispatcher asked, "Does she have a bullet hole?" Nate responded, "There's not just one. I think there are a couple in her head." When the investigators responded to the crime scene following Nate's call, they were met with a horrific sight. Despite their experience in handling similar cases, even they were initially uncertain that Amanda had been shot multiple times. Furthermore, there was no trace of a crime weapon or shell casings at the scene, which raised a crucial question. How had Nate determined that his sister had been shot multiple times in the first place? The investigators determined that it was impossible for someone standing in the doorway to see that Amanda had been shot in the head, or to know how many times she was shot. After returning to the Anderson house, the officers inspected the door, which Nate claimed was forced open when he got home. Although they found some scratches on the door, the lock was not damaged, leading the police to conclude that someone was trying to make it seem like the door had been kicked open. The crime lab examined all the weapons found at the Anderson house and determined that one of the .22 caliber pistols was likely the one used to shoot Amanda. Although they couldn't eliminate the possibility that this pistol was the murder weapon, the investigators drew a surprising conclusion after reviewing all the available evidence. It appeared that Amanda was killed by someone within her own family. The pistol had been hidden in a secure location, indicating that the killer was familiar with its whereabouts. Furthermore, the killer had returned the weapon to its original hiding place on the night of the crime. Amanda's father was having dinner with a friend, and her mother was at work. At the time, only Amanda and her 15-year-old brother Nate were in the house. Given the circumstances, all the evidence suggested that Nate Anderson was responsible. However, the question remained, what could have driven him to take their father's gun and ultimately to take his sister's life? The investigators took a closer look at what happened that evening. Mark Anderson recalled that he phoned his daughter to remind her to pick up her mother from work. 12 minutes later, Mark received a call from Nate, who was crying and told him that someone had shot him. It transpired that, before calling 911, Nate had initially called his father to inform him and his mother of the devastating news that their son had killed their daughter. The police required concrete evidence before making any charges, as they didn't want to cause Amanda and Nate's parents further distress. The investigators decided to interview Mark Anderson without making any accusations against his son. When asked if Nate had recently used the .22 caliber pistol, Mark replied that just a few days before Amanda's death, he had handed the pistol over to Nate and that Nate had fired it in the backyard. Upon returning to the Anderson house, the officers found several .22 caliber casings in the backyard, which matched the bullets found in Amanda's body. 2 weeks after Amanda's death, a crucial discovery was made that eliminated all doubts. The clothing Nate wore on the day he found his sister's body was submitted to a laboratory for luminol testing. The test results revealed the presence of blood stains on his clothes. A leading national blood spatter expert was called in to assist the investigators in Smith County, and together they concluded that Nate Anderson was either present in the room when the shooting took place, or that he himself fired the fatal shots. The test results revealed that Nate's clothes were stained with his sister's blood. Despite being typical siblings, the police were baffled as to what could have driven Nate to shoot Amanda. The investigation aimed to uncover the reason behind this uncharacteristic act of violence. Family photos of Amanda and Nate Anderson depicted a strong bond of friendship and affection, which their parents corroborated, describing their children as a loving Christian brother and sister who always got along. On November 10, 2010, police obtained an arrest warrant for Nate Anderson, which led them to apprehend him at a church. He was accused of murdering his own sister. The news sent shockwaves through the community, with everyone familiar with the case struggling to comprehend how Nate could commit such a heinous crime. The trial commenced on October 24, 2011, marking the beginning of a long and emotionally charged journey for all involved, especially the Anderson family. Despite the evidence presented against the teenager, his family members remained steadfast in their support, adamant that he was innocent of Amanda's murder. Nate was prosecuted as an adult despite an expert's opinion that it would be in his best interest to remain in the juvenile court system. The judge overruled this opinion. During the trial, the state presented some of the evidence found in the Anderson home after Amanda's death. Prosecutors revealed that Nate's computer had a history of accessing adult websites and contained drawings with violent content. Furthermore, a text message on Amanda's phone mentioned shooting Nathan. When her friend asked why, Amanda responded that it was because Nathan would shoot large staples at her head and never assisted with household chores. An expert testified that a discovery about Nate helped establish a possible motive for the crime. However, Nate's lawyer argued that the evidence presented was not unusual. Ultimately, in February 2012, Nate Anderson accepted a plea deal and pleaded guilty to a first-degree crime. Prior to his plea, Nate confessed to a psychologist and his parents that he was responsible for Amanda's death. He revealed that he shot her with a pistol from their home. In a joint statement, Mark and Stacy Anderson, Nate and Amanda's parents, expressed their emotional response to the confession. Mark said, "Nate asked for my forgiveness, and I forgave him." Stacy added, "As a mother who loves both her children, this has been the most difficult experience of my life." The court has sentenced Nate Anderson to a 20-year prison term with the possibility of parole after 10 years. According to Nate's attorney, accepting the plea agreement was in his best interest. The attorney stressed that neither Nate nor his family ever wanted the case to go to trial. When asked about the motive behind the crime, Nate's attorney refused to elaborate, saying only that Nate had shown remorse and had received forgiveness. The attorney, Brett Harrison, added that there had been many difficult conversations and tears. He stated that the incident was clearly a hate crime, as there was no evidence of any other trauma. The Smith County Sheriff's Office stated that Nate was eligible to apply for parole 2 years ago, but unfortunately, they were unable to find any information regarding whether he did so. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elizabeth Arellano. In the spring of 2016, in the peaceful town of Fort Worth, there was a brutal and cynical murder that even surprised the most experienced investigators. The victim of the crime was a young mother of many children named Elizabeth Poulet Arellano, who worked as a paramedic. It is shocking to discover who her executioner was. The circumstances surrounding the tragic incident were quite puzzling, leading the police to initially consider the possibility that Elizabeth may have passed away of her own volition. However, this theory was contradicted by the accounts provided by accidental witnesses who observed the horrific scene. The investigation required extensive efforts to thoroughly understand the events and bring the perpetrator to justice. Despite the brutality of the crime committed, many felt that the sentence imposed was overly lenient and unjust. Elizabeth Poulet Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in the American city of Fort Worth, Texas, where she was destined to live all her short life. She grew up with her 2 sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, with whom she was always practically inseparable. Elizabeth's birth father left the family when she was very young and showed no interest in the fate of his daughter, not contacting her in any way. Soon, her mother Juanita remarried a man named Fidel, who adopted her children and treated them as his own. Elizabeth had a very warm relationship with her stepfather, who supported and helped her in everything. She studied diligently at school and dreamed of one day becoming a doctor. In high school, she met a man named Rudolph Arellano, with whom she soon entered a romantic relationship. The young man was almost 8 years older than her, which somewhat embarrassed Elizabeth's parents. But they did not interfere with their romance, because the chosen partner seemed to them a serious and quite reliable man. At the age of 16, shortly after finishing school, Elizabeth married her partner. Legally, the couple had 4 children, one after the other, 3 sons and a daughter. However, despite the presence of multiple heirs, Elizabeth did not intend to become a homemaker. She recalled her childhood aspiration, so Elizabeth completed medical school and secured employment as a paramedic, with the intention of pursuing further education to become a physician. The young woman was kind and devout, raised in the Christian faith. She took her children to church regularly, instilling in them a love and compassion for their fellow human beings. Family and friends described her as a very caring person, always willing to lend a helping hand. From the outside, their marriage with Rudolph appeared strong and happy, but after 13 years of living together, this union began to show signs of strain. Rudolph had been jealous of his young wife earlier, trying to control every aspect of her life, but over time, his behavior became simply intolerable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth, after another jealousy scene organized by her husband, took the children and moved to her parents' house. Rudolph made an attempt to reconcile with his wife, but the young woman was tired of tolerating his outbursts of anger. Additionally, she did not want the children to listen to their parents' arguments almost every day, so she gathered her courage and officially filed for divorce. A few days after Elizabeth took the children and filed for divorce, she mysteriously disappeared. According to friends and family, she was in good spirits and, in order to distract herself from family problems and the impending divorce, decided after work to go with colleagues to a local club. So on the evening of April 15, 2016, the 28-year-old woman, accompanied by her friends, went to a fun place. There she danced and enjoyed herself, but did not consume any alcohol because she intended to drive home in her own car, which she had used to arrive at the club. Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th. After parking the car, she called her friend with whom she had spent the evening at the club and told her that she had already reached home and was doing fine. Elizabeth then hung up the phone but never went inside the house. The next morning, Juanita, her mother, was very worried when she found that her daughter was not home. She knew that Elizabeth had planned to spend the evening with friends, but her daughter should have returned a long time ago. Elizabeth could not have left somewhere without informing anyone, and besides, her car was parked outside the house, which meant that she had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, she found that it was not locked. The key remained in the ignition, and her daughter's purse and phone lay on the vacant seat. Naturally, she could not leave her personal effects unattended in the unlocked vehicle, implying something dreadful had transpired. She promptly contacted the authorities, reporting a missing person. The police were confident they could swiftly resolve the matter, as they say, while fresh. Furthermore, there was still hope Elizabeth was alive, as the car showed no signs of blood or struggle. Yet, the situation was far from straightforward. The investigation started by meticulously reconstructing the timeline of events on the evening and night in question, tracing Elizabeth's entire route to find and question all potential witnesses, beginning with the friends and colleagues she had spent time with before her disappearance. They provided the exact time when she returned home, and later, Elizabeth herself had called to confirm her safe arrival. Additionally, several calls and messages from her ex-husband, Rudolph Arellano, who had repeatedly attempted to reach her that night, were found on the missing person's phone, but Elizabeth had not responded to any of them. Police officers went to Rudolph's house to find out where he was and what he was doing the previous evening and night. According to him, he had been in contact with his ex-spouse just the night before, and she had promised that she would bring the children to him for the weekend. But afterward, she stopped answering the phone, and he thought she had changed her mind. As for an alibi, Arellano's alibi was questionable. According to him, he sat with a friend at a local bar that evening, and around midnight, he returned to his home and went to bed. His friend and several other people who had been relaxing at the same establishment on Friday confirmed that Rudolph was indeed there, but where he went afterward, no one could say for sure. He assured that he had gone home, but as he now lived alone, there was no one to confirm this. Thus, the police were not going to exclude Mr. Arellano from the list of suspects. Besides, he didn't seem upset or worried. It was clear that he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorce, but they had been married for many years, and she was the mother of his children, and it was strange that her disappearance had not affected him in any way. On the night of the disappearance of Elizabeth, a fisherman called the emergency services to report a strange incident he had witnessed. He said that he was sitting alone with a fishing rod on a bridge, which is part of an interstate highway, when about 4:30 in the morning, he noticed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver pulled out something large that looked like a person and threw it into the water. It also appeared to him that something bulky and obviously heavy was tied to this person. Since the fisherman was at a great distance and it was still dark, he could not see details, nor could he see the make and number of the car. In addition, there was a strong wind on the bridge, so he could not hear anything. Soon, another witness was found, walking at night with his dog down by the bridge. He did not see what was happening on the bridge itself, but a heartbreaking scream caught his attention. Then he saw something large flying down from the bridge, followed by a splash, and then silence. Based on the testimony of witnesses, the police decided to examine the bottom of the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers came across a body with a massive piece of concrete tied to its neck with a rope. The drowned woman turned out to be the missing Elizabeth Arellano. Had it not been for the testimony of a passerby and a fisherman, her body would probably have been discovered very soon or not found at all, because the tide weight did not allow the body to float. Then, a theory was put forward that the young woman decided to leave her life voluntarily, against the background of problems in the family. But this assumption was untenable, because it did not fit with the testimony of a witness who saw how someone threw her into the water, nor with the words of relatives who assured that Elizabeth made great plans for life and would never do this to her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck and thrown off the bridge. This was evidenced by the forensic medical results, which showed that the young woman had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her desperate scream as she flew down the bridge. However, the question remained as to who and for what reason could have so brutally murdered a mother of many children. Robbery was not considered because none of Elizabeth's belongings were taken. There were suggestions that the killer could have spotted Elizabeth in the club and then followed her home, or someone could have been guarding her at home, waiting for her to return. The ex-husband of Elizabeth, Rudolph, continued to insist that he was sleeping at his home on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime. However, the investigators were still in no hurry to exclude Rudolph from the list of suspects because he had no alibi, and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the funeral, Rudolph displayed an emotional performance, weeping at the coffin of his ex-wife and expressing a desire to be in her place or die alongside her. According to his sister, Elizabeth, he even believed the sincerity of his own words. Additionally, Rudolph actively assisted in the establishment of a charitable foundation to raise funds for the farewell ceremony for his wife. However, after the funeral, when he was once again called to testify, he already looked and behaved completely different, as if nothing bad had happened in his life. The investigation determined that a car of the same make and color as Rudolph's had driven away from Elizabeth's parents' house around 3 a.m. The neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road near Elizabeth's house, and it was established that the car had subsequently driven towards the very bridge from which she had been thrown. When the investigation requested Rudolph's cell phone data for the night of the crime, the questions became even more complex. It turned out that he made several calls that night, first near Elizabeth's workplace, and then near the home of his mother-in-law and father-in-law. He also sent his ex-wife several messages, trying to find out when she would return, but his messages went unanswered. The police finally had enough evidence to arrest Rudolph as the prime suspect and bring him to the station for further questioning. One of the key witnesses in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son, who stated that he had seen the rope removed from his mother's neck earlier in the backyard of his father's house and recognized a piece of concrete that had been lying in their garden shortly before. The investigation found that Rudolph waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home and abducted her before she could enter the house. He forced her into his car, in the trunk of which he had already prepared rope and concrete, and then drove to the bridge for the massacre, expecting to go unnoticed. Despite a large amount of evidence and witness testimony proving his guilt, Rudolph denied any involvement in the crime and continued to insist that he was at home that night. Given the brutality of his actions, Rudolph was facing the ultimate penalty of death, and then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess to everything and cooperate with the investigation to mitigate the sentence. In January 2019, Arellano pleaded guilty in court and detailed how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife and the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was in the courtroom listening to his story, fainted, and Alessandra and Giovanna called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph himself, though he admitted his guilt, felt no remorse or pangs of conscience. He spoke differently and coldly about his murder, did not apologize, and did not explain the motive for his terrible act. The court sentenced the murderer to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family members, although they considered such a sentence rather mild, noted that they forgive Rudolph because they do not want their hearts to boil with hatred. Her parents and sisters are now responsible for the upbringing of Elizabeth woman's children. Even though Elizabeth is no longer here, everyone in her family and community will always remember her. She was a lovely, lovely mother. I want to say a lovely daughter too. She was basically my daughter. She had the ultimate respect for me, as I did for her, said her stepfather Fidel Galvan in 2016. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Justine Valdez. Justine Valdez was born in 1993 in Aritao, a town situated 255 kilometers north of the Filipino capital Manila. She was the only child of Teresita and Danilo Valdez, also known as Tess and Danny. Justine attended St. Teresita's Academy, a Catholic secondary school in her hometown of Aritao. While Teresita and Danilo had moved to Ireland for work, Justine remained in the Philippines with family. In 2015, her parents were able to bring Justine to Ireland, and the family settled in the small village of Enniskerry in County Wicklow, near the Dublin-Wicklow border. After arriving in Ireland, Justine immediately began working, studying, and building a life for herself. She was extremely close to both of her parents and maintained constant contact with them when she wasn't at home. Justine was studying accountancy at IT Talit and worked 2 part-time jobs as a care worker and as a waitress in a cafe in the bustling coastal town of Bray. In November 2017, Justine began a relationship with Joseph Squire. Joseph later described Justine as being happy and active, saying she never got up to any mischief. She was way too innocent for that. He added that she was literally the most innocent person I ever met in my life, and I will never forget her. On May 19, 2018, 24-year-old Justine Valdez spent her afternoon with a routine she was familiar with. After completing paperwork for her residency permit, she went to the gym for a workout, wrapping up around 4:20 p.m. Justine then planned to head home, and her mother, Teres, sent her a quick text asking her to pick up some bread on the way. Justine obliged, making a stop at the store before catching the 185 bus bound for Bray, departing after 6 p.m. The bus dropped her off at the village of Enniskerry, a familiar stop near her rural home. From there, a 15 to 20-minute walk typically separated her from her doorstep. This journey, though not arduous for a young and active woman like Justine, became fraught with worry when she failed to return home. Teres, accustomed to Justine's punctuality and communication, grew increasingly anxious as time passed without word from her daughter. Calls and messages went unanswered, prompting Teres to venture out in search of Justine. She scoured the streets, stopping strangers to inquire about her daughter's distinct Asian features and sporty attire, which stood out in the crowd. Despite sightings of Justine disembarking the bus, her whereabouts remained a mystery. Teres's frantic search yielded no answers, leaving her with mounting fear and uncertainty about where Justine had gone and what could have befallen her on her seemingly routine journey home. With each passing moment, Teres's worry deepened, driving her to scour the streets for her daughter and any potential witnesses. Justine's disappearance left her mother in a state of distress, unable to find any trace of her daughter. In desperation, she reached out to the police to report the situation. Detectives promptly took her statement and initiated a search for Justine. At 5:20 p.m., Justine, still wearing her gym clothes, took the 185 bus from Bray to Enniskerry village, arriving at approximately 6 p.m. From there, she had a 15 to 20-minute walk until she reached home. It was a journey she would never have a chance to complete. Despite their humble beginnings, Justine's parents worked tirelessly to support her education and livelihood. Justine's parents worked as a gardener and housekeeper, respectively. Justine herself was known for her reliability, hard work, and dedication to her obligations. Given her strong ties to her family and her commitment to her responsibilities, no one believed she would willingly abandon her loved ones. Furthermore, her limited social circle and absence of typical teenage rebellious behavior made the idea of her running away seem implausible. Despite contacting all of Justine's acquaintances, none could provide insight into her whereabouts. At 24, Justine had outgrown any inclination for teenage defiance, remaining a steadfast and devoted member of her family until her sudden disappearance. Hence, the possibility of Justine running away was swiftly dismissed. She maintained an unwavering connection with her parents, updating them on her every move. On the particular day, she and her mother exchanged a staggering 63 messages, the last being at 6:24 p.m., when Justine alighted from the bus. As detectives diligently investigated leads to determine Jastine's whereabouts, a crucial tip emerged from her co-workers. Shortly after Jastine's bus stop, authorities were notified of a disturbing incident. A female motorist reported witnessing a man forcibly pushing an Asian woman with dark hair, dressed in sportswear similar to Jastine's, into the trunk of a black Nissan Qashqai. The woman recounted her harrowing experience, driving past the suspicious scene with her 12-year-old son and promptly alerting the police. Shortly after, another motorist passed by and witnessed a similarly distressing scene. This time, an Asian girl was seen seated in the back of the vehicle, tapping on the window in evident fear. Initially perplexed, the driver later discussed the incident with his wife. Upon returning home and realizing the gravity of the situation, he promptly contacted the authorities at 7:20 p.m. to report the suspected kidnapping. Another concerned driver also contacted the police, citing a suspicious Nissan vehicle driving erratically approximately 6 kilometers from Enniskerry. Patrol officers swiftly responded to the location provided by the initial female caller. There they discovered Jastine's broken cell phone and a bag of bread abandoned on the roadside, raising alarming concerns for her safety. Armed with this disturbing evidence, investigators concluded that the kidnapper had targeted Justine as she made her way home from the bus stop. After initial attempts to conceal her in the trunk were thwarted by Justine's resistance, the suspect forced her into the back seat before driving off to an unknown destination. The suspect's black Nissan was promptly added to the wanted list, prompting an extensive search effort involving patrol cars and helicopters. However, the night made the search more difficult, resulting in no result. When day broke, the search resumed, with detectives revisiting eyewitness testimonies and narrowing down potential suspects. One individual, 40-year-old Mark Hennessy, emerged as a person of interest due to his resemblance to the kidnapper's description. Police officers visited his residence, only to find his wife Nicola unaware of his whereabouts since he left for a drink after work the previous day. This information only raised more suspicions surrounding Mark, prompting investigators to delve further into his background. Mark Hennessy appeared to be a pillar of the community, widely regarded as a devoted family man, husband, and father to 2 young daughters, the youngest born just 8 months prior. Hailing from a respected family, he resided in an affluent neighborhood alongside other young families. Mark's occupation as an estimator on construction sites provided a stable income for his family, and he boasted a clean record with no prior brushes with the law. Despite his seemingly impeccable reputation, law enforcement remained cognizant of the unsettling reality that individuals may conceal darker motives beneath a veneer of respectability. With this in mind, the police officers visited the bar that Mark had frequented the previous night to gather more information. The staff confirmed his presence, but noted that his stay was brief. He had left after consuming a single beer and watching some soccer. Unimpressed by the excitement of the match, Mark's return to the bar around midnight appeared to be marked by visible agitation and unease. Upon reviewing the bar's CCTV footage, investigators corroborated the staff's accounts, observing that Mark's stay was approximately 10 minutes before he departed, at around 5:40 p.m. Engrossed in a phone conversation, he quickly made his way to his car and drove off, concluding his visit around 11:30 p.m. Interestingly, upon leaving the bar, Mark actually returned and engaged in a conversation with an acquaintance at the doorway before leaving once again. Detectives found themselves puzzled by Mark's whereabouts between 5:40 p.m. and 11 p.m., and the nature of his activities during this time remained a mystery. By this point, investigators had acquired CCTV footage from the bus route Justine had taken, and upon examination, a disturbing revelation emerged. Mark's black Nissan had trailed the bus just 30 minutes after he left the bar, shadowing its movements throughout the day. This revelation heightened suspicions surrounding his involvement, especially in relation to Justine's disappearance. The search for Mark's car and the missing girl persisted unabated, with growing certainty that the 2 incidents were intertwined. Mark emerged as a prime suspect in Justine's abduction, Despite efforts to track his cell phone, which intermittently powered on and off, Mark managed to evade detection. He made a solitary call to his wife, informing her of his continued absence. Even when confronted by his own family, who pleaded with him to surrender to the authorities, Mark remained obstinate and promptly departed. Mark's parents relayed this encounter to investigators, prompting renewed efforts to locate him. However, Mark remained elusive, staying a step ahead of law enforcement. In a bid for public assistance, the police issued appeals through the media, urging anyone with knowledge of Justine, Mark, or his car's whereabouts to come forward. One listener heeded this call, spotting a similar Nissan Qashqai on the road with a familiar-looking driver behind the wheel. Sensing an opportunity, she followed the vehicle to Cherrywood Park, where she observed the driver closely before promptly notifying the authorities. Upon arrival, the responding police officers encountered a man seated behind the wheel, his body covered in blood. Despite their attempts to coax him out of the vehicle, Mark remained obstinate, brandishing a knife in a menacing manner. Faced with imminent danger, the officers were compelled to resort to the use of firearms, resulting in a bullet striking Mark in the shoulder. Removing him from the car, they discovered him conscious, though uncooperative. As they commenced their examination of the vehicle, their hopes of locating the missing girl were dashed, as Justine was nowhere to be found. Persistent questioning yielded no answers from Mark, who maintained a steadfast silence. Medical personnel promptly attended to him, and he was swiftly transported to the hospital, where doctors battled to save his life, clinging to the hope that he might divulge Justine's whereabouts. Tragically, it was revealed that the bullet had tragically ricocheted, fatally striking Mark in the head. Subsequent investigations unearthed the grim truth. The blood adorning his face and body belonged to him, and he bore several fresh stab wounds on his arm and neck. Law enforcement speculated that, consumed by fear of exposure, Mark had chosen to confront his fate with the knife, conveniently stashed in his vehicle. When the police finally apprehended him, there was a sense of disappointment pervading the air. Despite successfully locating the suspect and his vehicle, their primary objective of finding the missing person remained unfulfilled. However, a note was discovered, its contents obscured by bloodstains. Through the haze of crimson, officers managed to discern the words "sorry" and "Puck's Castle," hinting at a potential lead to Justine's whereabouts. Though hope flickered dimly, they persevered in their search, while the anxious parents fervently prayed for their daughter's safe return. A meticulous search unfolded in a wooded expanse south of Dublin, guided by the cryptic clue near the castle. Initially, Justine's purse containing her identification documents was unearthed. Then, on May 21st, a grim discovery was made: the lifeless body of Justine Valdez. Autopsy revealed the horrific truth that she had been murdered on the very evening of her abduction, succumbing to manual strangulation. Tragically, evidence of sexual assault further compounded the brutality of her demise. However, amidst the sorrow and despair, another unsettling revelation emerged. Toxicological analysis unveiled the presence of prohibited substances in Justine's body. This posed a puzzling enigma, as there was no clear explanation for the origin or purpose of these substances. Conversely, the analysis found that Mark had ingested a significant quantity of these substances, further deepening the mystery surrounding the tragic events. It emerged that Mark had recently spiraled into alcohol and substance abuse, likely contributing to the presence of these substances in Justine's system. Concurrently, his domestic life had deteriorated, with frequent spats between him and his spouse over his substance abuse and mounting debts. Investigations revealed Mark's engagement with the dating app Tinder, where he actively pursued interactions with various women, including flirting with female patrons at bars. Further incriminating evidence emerged when Mark's DNA was found on the victim's body, reinforcing the police's suspicions about his involvement in Justine's abduction and subsequent murder. Detectives pieced together a disturbing narrative. The murder was driven by sexual motives, and Justine became an unwitting victim in Mark's sinister pursuit of prey. Spotting her while following a bus, he seized the opportunity in broad daylight, brazenly abducting her from the street without hesitation, even in the presence of multiple witnesses. A thorough examination of the victims' and perpetrators' phones revealed no prior acquaintance or communication between them. Their paths had never crossed before, with no mutual connections to bridge the gap between victim and assailant. This grim revelation underscored the tragic randomness of Jastine's fate and the calculated brutality of Mark's actions. Upon closer scrutiny, the detective's initial assessment underwent a significant shift. It transpired that Mark was intimately familiar with the route Justine frequently traversed, suggesting a premeditated nature to her murder. Far from a spur-of-the-moment act, Mark had been meticulously observing her movements, biding his time until he deemed it opportune to strike. The day of the abduction marked a deliberate departure from his usual routine, as he purposefully positioned himself at the bus stop, tailing Jastine's every move until he pounced on her unsuspecting victim. The revelation sent shockwaves through the local community, unaccustomed to such heinous acts in their otherwise tranquil neighborhood. Many rallied around the grieving family, offering solace and support during their time of immense loss. At the farewell ceremony, poignant tributes were paid as white balloons soared into the sky, symbolizing hope amidst despair. Some attendees donned pink t-shirts emblazoned with Jastine's likeness, a touching homage to her memory. Ultimately, Jastine's family chose to lay her to rest in her native Philippines, seeking solace in familiar surroundings. Though they initially remained abroad for a period, they eventually returned to Ireland in 2021, seeking a fresh start and new opportunities. Relocating to a different city and pursuing new occupations offered a chance to heal from the harrowing memories that haunted them in their former home. Mark Hennessy exhibited the characteristic behavior of a serial sex offender. They concluded that although his crime seemed spontaneous and unplanned, he displayed the traits of someone who had committed such acts multiple times previously. In the early days of the investigation, it emerged that a man matching Hennessy's age and physical description had been harassing female passengers at train stations in South County, Dublin, over several years, including exposing himself to them. However, there is no definitive proof that Hennessy and the serial harasser were the same person. We will likely never know, as Mark Hennessy's secrets died with him. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. When an obsession transforms a quiet individual into a monster, it parallels many grave addictions akin to severe illnesses with psychological, biological, or social roots. This case involves a destructive habit. Whether it's an urge for alcohol, prohibited substances, gambling, or an obsessive need for a particular activity or interaction with a certain person or group, it's tragic. Addiction affects not just the individual, but also their loved ones who genuinely strive to help. The once prosperous and happy Amato family faced such a dilemma head-on. As all family members were healthcare professionals, they believed they could manage the situation without external assistance. However, by the time they recognized the severity of the issue, it was regrettably too late. This isn't merely a story of addiction, but of a young man's extreme obsession with a woman he had never met in person. Compounded by his addiction to forbidden substances and a pathological inclination towards theft, the situation spiraled into a horrifying outcome. Let's delve into this case to understand if there was any chance to alter the course of events and prevent the tragedy. Bloodshed at the family home occurred on January 25, 2019. A concerned man contacted the Soule County Police in Florida. He reported that his close friend and colleague, Cody Amato, a nurse, unexpectedly didn't show up for his shift at the hospital, which was highly unusual for him. The day before, Cody had left work about 15 minutes early due to some urgent family issues at home. He departed so hastily he even forgot to collect his pay for the day. Attempts to reach the 31-year-old Cody by phone were unsuccessful. He simply wasn't answering. His girlfriend stated that Cody went to his parents' house the previous day at his father's request, but never returned to her place. She too couldn't reach him. All these signs triggered alarming thoughts and prompted the dispatch of police officers to the provided address. The Amato family home, located in a suburb of Orlando, featured a large adjoining area with a stable and a horse walking area. Cody's car was parked in the driveway, lights were on in several rooms of the house. Everything seemed ordinary at first glance. Doors and windows were intact. When the sheriff's deputy knocked, there was no response. Calls to the landline also went unanswered. The police then sought permission to enter. Upon approval, they cautiously unlocked the back door using a knife to slide the bolt. Inside, an eerie silence pervaded, although the lit rooms suggested someone must be present. Indeed, the homeowners were there. The officers first discovered the lifeless body of 59-year-old Chad Amato, lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of his own blood, with 2 close-range gunshot wounds to his chest. Next, at the staircase opposite the main entrance, they found Cody curled up and also deceased in a massive pool of blood. Lastly, 61-year-old Margaret Amato was found sitting at her computer in the home office. At first glance, she seemed to be napping with her head resting on her arm. However, blood splatters on the monitor and a large spreading stain beneath her head. The murder weapon, an IWE Jericho 941 pistol, was found next to Cody's body and later determined by forensic experts to have his fingerprints on it. There were no signs of break-in or external presence, and nothing appeared missing from the house. Initially, it seemed like Cody might have ended their lives after a family dispute before shooting himself in the chest. However, smeared blood on the front door suggested it was locked by someone leaving after the incident, indicating that the perpetrator wasn't among the deceased family members. Regarding a suspect, those familiar with or connected to the Amato family had little doubt. They pointed to their youngest son, 30-year-old Grant Amato. Grant had been missing since that evening. His car, a white Honda, along with some personal items such as a laptop from his room, were gone, implying that he had taken them with him. Grant was identified as a suspect, prompting a search to locate his whereabouts. Here's what we know about the Amato family. Margaret Amato, née Wade, married Chad Robert Amato in the mid-1990s. Margaret, 2 years older than Chad, was raising a 3-year-old son, Jason, from a marriage. Chad wasn't dissuaded by the fact she had a child. Instead, he embraced Jason as his own. In 1988, they welcomed their first child together, Cody. Their youngest son, Grant Tyan Amato, was born on May 20th, 1989. From childhood, the brothers shared a close bond. Raised in an affluent family environment, they rarely faced adversity. However, to enjoy certain privileges, they had to follow family rules, excel academically, help with chores, and demonstrate good behavior. Their parents held advanced degrees in healthcare. Margaret was a senior operational manager at a reputable private clinic, while Chad initially worked as a clinical pharmacist before transitioning to software specialization. The family's financial status allowed them to live comfortably in a spacious suburban home and indulge in breeding thoroughbred racehorses as a hobby. Jason left home at 18 after finishing high school to attend university and build his own life. He got married and settled down with his family in another state, but maintained close ties with his parents and younger brothers. Cody and Grant were nearly inseparable, attending the same school and joining the same sports teams. They also regularly visited the shooting range on weekends with their father. The Amatos had an impressive firearm collection, featuring rare pieces available only to Chad for safety reasons. Grant was the youngest of the 3 sons, and naturally received much attention and care from everyone due to his frail and sickly nature as a child. This made him grow up shy and modest, finding it challenging to connect with peers outside of his brothers. Grant became particularly close to Cody after Jason grew up and left home following high school graduation. Eventually, both brothers pursued medical degrees and became anesthesiologists. Cody excelled in his studies, becoming the top student in his class. Both managed to land jobs in their field at a hospital. Cody a reputation as a reliable professional, but Grant frequently got into trouble and made errors, often needing his work double-checked. In the summer of 2018, Grant's career at the hospital ended scandalously. He was caught stealing strictly controlled sedatives, which caused euphoria and hallucinations and were used rarely for anesthesia. The discovery led to police involvement, and Grant was arrested. During interrogation, he admitted to the theft, claiming he administered the drugs to patients who, in his opinion, were under-medicated. Many believed Grant was using or selling the drugs illegally, though there was no direct evidence of this. He was immediately suspended and later fired. His criminal case for theft was eventually dismissed, reportedly due to his parents' intervention. Unemployed and dependent on the internet after losing his job, the 29-year-old man, already a loner, became even more withdrawn. He spent weeks indoors, glued to his computer, mostly browsing adult websites. Grant never had a girlfriend and struggled with social interactions with women, leaving him feeling inadequate. He indulged in viewing adult content and frequently interacted with webcam models on specialized platforms, trying to fill the void of a non-existent personal life. This private interaction naturally came at a cost. Grant easily accessed funds from his parents' and older brother's accounts for these activities. This obsession quickly spiraled into an addiction compounded by regular alcohol consumption. Yet Grant seemed content with this lifestyle, living off his family and spending their money without contributing anything in return. Eventually, his father issued an ultimatum: find a job soon, or he would have to leave home and lose any financial support from the family. Grant promised his father to resolve the issue but had no real intention of seeking employment. He claimed he would become a streamer, earning by broadcasting video games. Grant's parents, considering it better than nothing, agreed to set up a streaming station for him. In reality, he was locked in his room indulging in his favorite pastime, visiting adult-only websites. In August 2018, Cody took a vacation from work and decided to embark on a journey across the globe for a change of. He dreamed of visiting Japan and invited his younger brother Grant and his best friend Jeremy. While Cody and Jeremy funded their trip independently, Grant's vacation was financed by their parents. However, instead of giving the money directly to Grant, they entrusted it to Cody, who was seen as the more responsible of the two. The trip lasted nearly 2 weeks. Throughout it, Grant seemed disengaged and showed little interest in tours or landmarks. He was constantly fixated on his smartphone screen and often stayed back at the hotel using his brother's laptop. One day when the group went to Lake Kawaguchi near Mount Fuji, Jeremy accidentally left his credit card in their hotel room. Seizing the opportunity, Grant hacked into Jeremy's account and withdrew thousands of dollars. He spent it all on private sessions with his favorite webcam model. Jeremy discovered the theft later, but initially suspected fraud. He couldn't pinpoint the culprit and continued investigating after returning home, unaware that Grant was responsible. About the identity of the mysterious webcam model, who became an obsession for Grant. On a site where he paid for private online interactions with various women, he met Silvia Venizlavova from Bulgaria, known as Silly. She captivated him with her striking looks and confidence. Sylvia's charisma and passion made Grant feel special, loved, desired, and unique. He really thought her feelings for him were genuine. He believed they could have a real relationship. Grant was sure they were together and needed to win over this fiery brunette from all her admirers. He spent hours and thousands of dollars daily to ensure she had no time for other men. Grant also showered her with gifts like expensive lingerie and jewelry, which she wore during their video chats. Desperate to impress Sylvia, Grant constantly fabricated stories and lost touch with reality. He claimed he lived alone in a large house, owned a successful business, and could afford to lavish her with money. To back up his claims, he made money transfers, initially sending a couple thousand, then $10,000, and even $100,000 as a birthday gift. Naturally, Grant's lavish spending did not go unnoticed by his parents, since he was using their accounts. At first, he explained these expenditures as investments in his own online project to attract an audience. But Chad and Margaret quickly realized their son was lying. A serious family dispute erupted at home. The father demanded that the youngest son immediately pack his things and leave. but his mother and Cody intervened on Grant's behalf. The family understood that Grant was suffering from severe internet addiction, but they were baffled about how he had spent nearly $200,000 from their accounts. A thorough search in his room uncovered vials of potent substances. Grant explained he used them to keep from going insane. The parents announced they would cut off his access to their accounts and intended to send him for mandatory treatment for drug and internet addiction. In response, Grant declared he was tired of everything and ready to end his life. He then dashed out of the house, jumped into his car, and sped away at high speed in an unknown direction. Later, it was discovered that Grant went to his aunt and uncle's house, where he crashed through their fence and hit the garage wall. Aware of the turmoil in the Amato family, his relatives sympathized with him and offered him a place to stay until things settled down. He readily agreed, but ended up robbing his kind-hearted relatives instead. The following day, thousands of dollars were stolen from several accounts. The funds were used to pay for interactions with Sylvie. When Grant's aunt informed his parents, they asked her not to involve the police, promising to resolve the issue and return the stolen money promptly. That same day, Chad personally went to their house and took Grant home. Chad, Margaret, and Cody soon realized that reasoning with Grant was futile. If he left home, he would likely commit theft again. They then presented Grant with a stark choice. He could either go to a rehabilitation clinic for treatment of his addictions or face jail time for theft. Reluctantly, Grant agreed to enter the clinic, where he would spend 2 months away from any temptations. He was admitted to the medical institution at the end of December 2018. During his treatment, Grant's parents checked his computer and discovered how he had been spending thousands of dollars daily from their family accounts. They found Sylvie's profile, the woman who had deeply influenced their son, and reviewed their correspondence, finding hundreds of recordings of their private online interactions. These were moments that Grant treasured and often revisited. The Amos family decided to inform Sylvie about her admirer. They revealed that the man who had showered her with money and gifts was not a businessman, but an unemployed individual with drug and internet addictions. They also pointed out that the funds Grant transferred were stolen, potentially subjecting him to criminal charges. However, Sylvie remained indifferent, as for her, it was just a job, and she had no intention of returning the money. On January 5, 2019, just a couple of weeks into his treatment, Grant unexpectedly returned home after completing less than a quarter of the necessary rehabilitation program. He had fled the clinic, where he was noted for his lack of compliance. Tearfully vowing to turn his life around and find employment, Grant threatened to end his life if forced back into the rehab center. Grant's parents agreed to give him a chance, but imposed strict rules. He was forbidden from using the computer, had to adhere to a schedule, and his earnings were closely monitored. Additionally, he took up a part-time job at a local grocery warehouse. For about 3 weeks, Grant appeared compliant, leading his parents to believe he had matured and left his behind. However, this changed on Thursday, January 24, 2019. On that day, Grant persuaded his mother to let him use the laptop briefly. He claimed he needed it to check his email and post his resume online in search of a more ambitious job than his current warehouse position. Trusting her son, Margaret allowed him access to the laptop, a decision that proved fatal. Naturally, one of Grant's first actions was to contact Sylvie. To his dismay, he discovered that his parents had already written to her, exposing the truth about him. He perceived this as a betrayal. In Grant's view, they had humiliated him in front of the only woman he loved, and he decided they had to pay for that. Remember the home gun collection previously mentioned? Chad had kept most of it in a special large safe for which no one else had the key. Nonetheless, Grant knew about another gun stored in his parents' bedroom, which was always kept loaded by his father. This was the weapon he decided to use. His mother was sitting at the computer in the home office when Grant approached her quietly from behind and shot her in the back of the head. The position of her body suggested she didn't have time to turn around or understand what was happening. His next target was his father, Chad, who would soon be returning home from work. As soon as Chad entered the kitchen, he was confronted face to face with Grant and immediately received 2 bullets to the chest. Grant tensely contemplated his next move and devised an even more monstrous plan. He decided to frame his own brother Cody. Cody had always stood up for Grant and was considered his best friend. By that time, Cody had moved out of the family home and was living separately with his girlfriend. To carry out his plan, Grant needed to lure Cody back home. Grant, using his now deceased father's phone, sent several messages urging his brother to return home immediately due to an undefined emergency. He didn't provide details, confident that this would prompt a quick response. His assumption proved accurate. Cody left work early and hurried home. Upon entering the house, he barely reached the bottom of the staircase leading to the 2nd floor before being shot and collapsing. Cody didn't die instantly. He realized the gravity of the situation, but was powerless to act. Afterwards, Grant methodically wiped fingerprints off the pistol and placed it in Cody's hand to leave prints, staging the scene to suggest Cody had shot their parents and then himself. The rest of the evening, Grant calmly packed his belongings, downloaded communication files with Sylvie from the computer, and even texted her. Having concluded his tasks, he loaded essentials into his car and drove away. The police quickly tracked Grant down and arrested him at a small roadside motel in Orange County within just over a day. He wasn't surprised but expressed disappointment at being found so quickly while staunchly denying guilt during interrogation. He concocted tales of his father's alleged cruelty toward himself, his mother, and brother. Grant claimed that his father tried to separate him from his girlfriend Sylvie, whom he professed true love for. Regarding the tragic events at their family home on January 24, 2019, Grant's account was confusing and inconsistent. He suggested there had been a fight between his father and brother. According to him, Cody grabbed a gun and killed Chad, with Margaret becoming an accidental victim. He maintained that he could only guess at these events' chronology as he wasn't present himself. He spent the night in his car with his belongings. In the morning, he simply drove away without realizing the tragedy that had occurred at home. His narrative came across as inconsistent and implausible. Furthermore, the evidence indirectly pointed to him as the sole perpetrator. Consequently, Grant was arrested as the primary suspect in the triple homicide of his family members. Unable to post a $750,000 bond, he remained in custody, awaiting trial. The trial began on July 15, 2019. Notably, almost all witnesses who testified in court spoke against Grant. This included his older brother Jason, relatives, and Cody's friend Jeremy, from whom Grant had stolen money during their trip to Japan. Those closely acquainted with him described Grant as prone to various addictions, a pathological thief and liar. The main piece of evidence against Grant was a significant bank transfer from Chad's account to Grant's account. This transaction took place late at night when all family members were already deceased. To confirm the transaction, Grant used his deceased father's finger for identification purposes. The prosecution advocated for the death penalty, while his defense argued that Grant was ill and required treatment. On August 12, 2019, a verdict was delivered. The court found 30-year-old Grant Amato guilty of first-degree triple homicide and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Located in the department of Santa Maria near Cord City in Argentina, was home to Ana Rosa Berra, a 40-year-old woman with dreams of becoming a grandmother. Family friends described her as having a courageous character and adventurous spirit. When faced with starting over, she courageously moved forward. According to some reports, she lived in a tent for 4 years. However, the specific reasons for this remain unknown. Ana Rosa worked at the Secretariat for Children, Adolescents, and Families in Cordoba, a job she loved. She also co-ran an upholstery workshop with her partner Marcelo Fabio Ferretto. They met when she began sewing for his business. By 2017, Ana Rosa was 46 and Marcelo 51. They had been living together for a decade and practiced Reiki together. This complementary therapy involves applying palms to restore physical, mental, and spiritual balance. Nonetheless, the couple faced challenges and disagreements became prevalent. Both had 4 children from prior relationships. 2 of Ana Rosa's children resided in Salto province. The other 2 were abroad, one in France and another set to become a father in Bolivia. Her parents and siblings lived in Cordoba too. Ana Rosa had a positive relationship with her colleagues who frequently met both her and Marcelo. He worked as a wallpaper maker with his workshop near their home. Close acquaintances observed him as jealous and controlling, which increasingly irritated Ana Rosa. On Sunday, May 28th, the couple visited relatives in Villa Lens City. During their journey back, they argued intensely when Marcelo checked Ana Rosa's cell phone. The dispute continued at home into early Monday morning. Neighbors overheard them yelling and hurling insults at each other before things momentarily calmed down, only temporarily though. Hours later, Marcelo reported his wife as missing to the police. Despite various reports on when the man filed his report, most sources agreed he visited the 18th police station on Tuesday, May 30th. Marcelo informed the police and repeated to the media that he woke up at 6 a.m. that Monday morning, as usual, but his wife was already gone. He explained that Ana Rosa would typically rise early to feed the dogs before leaving home. Until then, everything seemed like a typical Monday, with Marcelo following his regular routine. The news of Ana Rosa's disappearance shocked Los Cerdos residents and the province. Her husband's statements indicated that the last time he saw her was Sunday night when they went to bed. Digital newspapers and TV stations reported Marcelo grew concerned upon receiving calls from Ana Rosa's colleagues puzzled by her absence from work, as she was not one to be absent without a valid reason. Marcelo recalled that on Monday, during a visit to a drugstore for some shopping, he stumbled upon Ana Rosa's white Chevrolet parked on Rainier Avenue in front of a beauty salon in Santa Isabel, strategically located between their home and her workplace. Her personal items and keys were in the car. Only her cell phone was missing. Marcelo claimed he had called her multiple times, and even friends and children left messages, all without response. The last WhatsApp message sent by Ana Rosa occurred at 10:40 p.m. on Sunday, May 28th. Individuals familiar with the case remained uncertain about what might have occurred or if she fell victim to a crime. Since submitting his report, Marcelo has stayed in constant contact with police while also leveraging social media and traditional media to aid in locating his wife. During an interview with reporters, Marcelo noted that Ana Rosa intended to go swimming at the gym early on the day she disappeared and had plans to meet with a trauma surgeon later. The most critical aspect for him is having her home safely. Regarding finding her car, Marcelo described exiting the pharmacy on Monday afternoon to see her vehicle outside a beauty and massage parlor. Considering Ana Rosa had complained of neck pain earlier, he decided to check if she was inside the salon. As he possessed a spare key for the car, he opened it and went through her belongings inside. He mentioned briefly suspecting she'd perhaps left due to an argument early Monday morning, but soon focused solely on finding her. The sequence of events as narrated by Marcelo paints a picture filled with anxiety and concern over his wife's sudden disappearance. According to his Reiki teacher, if she decided to leave, he should leave her alone. Prosecutor Legandro Altatonello of Altagracia took over the case. The investigation began immediately. Initially, several hypotheses were put forward. On the one hand, there was the possibility that Ana Rosa was the victim of kidnapping or robbery. They also considered the possibility of revenge. It wasn't excluded that she left voluntarily. As part of the investigation, Marcelo testified for more than 14 hours on Wednesday, May 31st. He gradually began to fall into a series of contradictions that, to the investigator, showed him less and less as the distraught husband of the missing woman, and more as the prime suspect in her disappearance. Everything Marcelo said made no sense to the detectives. Plus, his moods went through different stages, which alarmed experienced forensic investigators. At first, he seemed euphoric, confident, constantly giving interviews to the press. Then he began to extol his innocence, giving details nobody had asked about, and even tried to justify himself by talking about his relationship with Ana Rosa and her anger at him. Marcelo also began to say directly and without question that he couldn't have done anything wrong to his partner. The circumstances of Ana Rosa's car appearing at the scene where it was found and Marcelo's explanation of its discovery raised several doubts. According to witnesses living in that area where the car was found, it was left by a man in gray clothing, not a woman. As hours passed, despair grew among Ana Rosa's loved ones. Despite intensive search efforts, there were no results. While the search continued, investigative authorities pursued leads diligently. The prosecutor in charge felt convinced Marcelo was hiding something and insisted on a deeper investigation into this suspect. On Friday, June 2nd, during another meeting with police officers, Marcelo changed his attitude. He became calmer. Yet when detectives presented him with cell phone antenna data showing movements that didn't match his story, the man broke down and revealed the truth came out. Marcelo admitted to the tragic killing of Ana Rosa, disclosing that he ran her down and then dismembered body to dispose of the remains. Following his confession, he also indicated where he had buried the dismembered of his partner of the last decade. A few hours later, police supported by a canine unit discovered Ana Rosa's remains. Excavations began around 2:30 p.m., concluding the search and uncovering her dismembered body in a hole Marcelo had dug himself. This area was situated on a dirt road, located in the countryside opposite a factory and roughly 200 meters away from Highway 5, which links the provincial capital with Alta Gracia. According to prosecutor Peralta Tonello, Marcelo was quite familiar with this location as he frequently visited it for work-related purposes. Everything Marcelo had previously stated turned out to be false, except for mentioning an early Monday morning quarrel. For Ana Rosa's family and friends, their worst fears materialized step by step. The prayers and hopes that she would return soon shifted into pleas for comfort and justice following this devastating revelation. The grief-stricken tears of uncertainty transformed into cries of irreparable loss and anger directed at the killer who had deceived everyone for days. Marcelo's acquaintances described him as jealous and manipulative, someone who kept Ana Rosa preoccupied with endless questions and demands. His controlling nature came to light during the investigation when it was found that he had hacked into Ana Rosa's social media account after managing to crack the password. The profile gathered on Marcelo revealed he knew all of Ana Rosa's passwords even prior to committing the crime. According to reconstructed events, they had been fighting throughout the weekend before she was reported missing. Marcelo's extreme jealousy ultimately led to this tragedy. Amidst one such heated argument, he struck her multiple times with a sledgehammer until she died. Attempting initially to place her lifeless body in his car but failing, he resorted to using a knife to dismember it. He then placed the remains in his vehicle and drove to the location where they were discovered days later. Pleading guilty, a new search was initiated on Friday at the residence shared by defendant and Ana Rosa. Various tools, including cleavers and knives of different sizes, were found during the search. Marcelo was arrested and spent his first night in jail. He charges of aggravated murder, femicide, and gender-based violence, all carrying life sentences. Prosecutor Peralta Atema clarified that Marcelo's admission could not be considered a full confession. Thus, the record noted he admitted to the crime while being interviewed as a witness. Further statements would be made once sufficient evidence was gathered. Documents essential to the case include the final autopsy report, forensic analysis of vehicles and items collected during searches, and outcomes of luminol tests at multiple locations. The defendant's attorney, Jose Luis Saca, stated that despite Marcelo's admission, he would seek his client's release. He argued that police statements held no legal authority, but could guide the prosecutor's procedural decisions without being definitive. Additionally, the defense attorney stated his client would not provide any testimony. Examinations continued over the weekend, and on Monday, June 5th, a preliminary autopsy report was published. This report indicated that Ana Rosa's cause of death was severe head trauma. The defendant's lawyer mentioned awaiting the lifting of secrecy to review evidence against Marcelo. He emphasized that psychiatric and psychological evaluations were crucial in understanding Marcelo's emotional state, possibly a significant aspect for the defense. On June 9th, it emerged that luminol tests conducted at their residence showed significant blood amounts had been washed into the patio area. The medical examiners discovered new insights after performing autopsies, noting cuts on the extremities inflicted by someone skilled with a knife. A significant wound, measuring 18 centimeters long and 7 centimeters deep, was found on the victim's neck, extending to the cervical region. Given these findings, the prosecutor's office charged Marcelo Fabio Ferreira with double aggravated murder due to his relationship with the victim and gender-based violence. After Ana Rosa went missing, her acquaintances shared information about her partner, and their relationship with both media and authorities. Viviana Lujan, a friend of Ana Rosa, mentioned that Ana started changing her style and stopped wearing lace-up shoes to work. She let down her hair and told Viviana that she felt prettier and more feminine. According to Viviana, these changes led to arguments with Marcelo. Other friends also noted that Ana Rosa had been in high spirits lately and seemed happy. She confided that she and Marcelo were experiencing difficulties, but were making efforts to improve their relationship. The couple even took several short trips together. Marcelo's trial for Ana Rosa's murder commenced nearly 2 years after the incident. The prosecutor's office presented the gravity of the charges to the jury meticulously. Final autopsy results revealed that Ana Rosa suffered a severe blunt force blow to the face, rendering her unconscious. Subsequently, multiple blows to the head resulted in a crushed skull. During the first hearing, Marcelo chose to remain silent while witness testimonies followed. Deborah Territorios, one of Ana Rosa's daughters and the first witness, testified that since her mother met Marcelo, she had grown distant from her children and other family members. Deborah explained they were initially compelled to move from Salta with their father, followed by her older siblings' relocation. This geographic separation worsened communication gaps with their mother. She noted that when alone with their mother, Ana Rosa was loving and attentive. However, whenever Marcelo appeared, her mother became distant. Deborah even mentioned hurriedly leaving her mother's house whenever she knew Marcelo was about to arrive. Ana Rosa's cousin, Roberto Enrique Reina, testified about the events that transpired on May 28, 2017, in his house where the altercation began. Roberto provided a detailed account of the quarrel. According to his testimony, the dispute originated from a message Marcelo discovered on Ana Rosa's cell phone. However, Roberto noted that Marcelo's jealousy appeared typical and not particularly unusual, which did not substantially benefit the prosecution. The prosecutor highlighted the accused's dominance over the victim, pointing out asymmetrical power dynamics and objectification of the woman in front of others. In terms of gender violence, the case file referred to evidence of obsessive jealousy from Marcelo. He enrolled in the same classes Ana Rosa attended, synchronized their schedules, and exerted complete control over her movements. The defense strategy focused on modifying the charges and scrutinizing actions leading to Marcelo's confession to the police that he committed the crime. It is important to note that at that time, Marcelo was testifying as a witness without legal representation present. If it can be established that law enforcement was already targeting him when he admitted to killing Ana Rosa, his confession might be deemed inadmissible, potentially invalidating other associated case files. Nevertheless, the prosecutor argued successfully that Marcelo's admission of guilt was evaluated against Supreme Court precedents and was accepted as evidence, despite lacking an attorney's presence during his statement. The second day of hearings saw continued testimonies. Notably, Fernanda Falimia, who was Ana Rosa's girlfriend, provided insights into Marcelo's behavior. According to her testimony, he had been controlling and increasingly violent shortly before Ana Rosa's tragic death. Fernanda, a colleague of the victim, testified that when Ana Rosa started her relationship with Marcelo, she became distant, but later tried to renew their friendship. Fernanda mentioned that Marcelo tried to follow his partner's every move. Notably, he even started taking Reiki classes after Ana Rosa began attending them. The indictment indicates that after starting energy harmonization therapy, Ana Rosa told her friend she felt good. She had mended her relationships with her mother, sister, and children, and intended to visit her son in Bolivia. Yet, as these positive changes began, Marcelo's behavior grew increasingly aggressive. Fernanda reported that Ana Rosa once remarked that women could achieve things with a great attitude. Marcelo angrily retorted that they were all fools who would end up dying in a ditch. Fernanda also noted the couple hadn't been living in the same room lately. Ana Rosa slept upstairs, Marcelo downstairs. On the hearing's second day, Claudio Bustamante, a police officer who took Marcelo's statement on May 2, 2017, gave his testimony as well. He assured the jury it was spontaneous. Marcelo had confessed without any pressure from him during the interrogation. Marcelo mentioned that on Monday, Ana Rosa informed him that he no longer satisfied her and admitted to infidelity. He confessed that this revelation made him angry, leading him to strike her, although he could not recall with what. Marcelo then recounted falling asleep at the table, waking up later to go to bed. He described the experience as dreamlike and surreal. He firmly believes that if he had been fully conscious, he wouldn't have committed such an act. With visible emotion, Marcelo apologized to the community, Ana Rosa's family, and his own relatives for the pain caused. On April 11th, the jury of the 11th Criminal Court found Marcelo Fabio guilty of Ana Rosa Barrera's double aggravated murder. He received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 35 years, contingent on demonstrating good behavior. Upon hearing the verdict, the victim's family expressed their anguish and directed shouts and curses at Marcelo as he was swiftly escorted from the courtroom. The prosecutor remarked that the jury's decision aligned with the prosecution's request. Evidence demonstrated that Marcelo Fabio acted with full awareness and had premeditated his actions against Ana Rosa. Prosecutors asserted that claiming a lack of full consciousness during the crime was a deliberate attempt to evade the maximum penalty.